She stepped off that stagecoach with one suitcase, $20, and a job offer from the most feared man in the valley, and every woman on that street turned away like she'd already made the worst mistake of her life. They warned her. They begged her. One woman grabbed her arm and whispered, "Don't go up there alone." But Lillian Parker looked at that road leading north and picked up her bag anyway. If you've ever walked toward something everyone told you to run from, stay until the very end of this story. Subscribe so you never miss one of ours. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Lillian's story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Lillian Parker stepped down onto the sun-hardened dirt of Harrow Creek, Montana territory, with one small leather suitcase and not a single soul waiting to meet her. She didn't expect anyone. That was fine. She'd stopped expecting things from people a long time ago. The summer of 1884 had already turned brutal by the time she arrived, the kind of heat that pressed down on a person like a hand flat against the back of a neck, relentless and without mercy. The mountains in the distance still held their snow-capped dignity, but down here in the valley, everything was dry and cracked and quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like something holding its breath. Lillian straightened her back and looked around. Harrow Creek was not a large town. It had a general store, a post office no bigger than a broom closet, a saloon that already had 2 horses tied up outside, even though the morning was barely half gone, and a church at the far end of the main road with a cross that leaned slightly to the left. There were people on the boardwalk, a woman sweeping her doorstep, 2 men in hats talking low, a child chasing a dog that didn't want to be caught. They all looked up when she stepped off the coach. They all looked away just as quickly. She had learned to read that kind of silence years ago. You don't belong here. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the general store because that was where she'd been told to go. She had a letter in the pocket of her dress, folded twice, the paper gone soft from being opened and refolded too many times on the long journey west. The letter was a job offer. Ranch work. Cooking, cleaning, and whatever else needed doing on a spread called the Whitaker Ranch, 7 miles north of town. The wages were fair. The work was honest. That was all Lillian needed to know. She pushed open the door of the general store, and the little bell above it chimed. A heavy-set man behind the counter looked up. He had the kind of face that had settled into permanent suspicion somewhere around age 40 and had never found a reason to rearrange itself. He took in her dress, her suitcase, her face cataloging her the way a man does when he's already decided what he thinks, before he's asked a single question. "Help you," he said. "I'm looking for directions to the Whitaker Ranch," Lillian said. "My name is Lillian Parker. I've been hired on as house help." The man's expression shifted, not toward warmth, toward something else entirely. He set down the can he was stacking and looked at her the way a person looks at someone who has just admitted to a poor decision they don't yet know is poor. "You the woman who answered that ad," he said. "I am." I made a sound in the back of his throat. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a warning. "How much did he tell you about the place?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "Wages, room and board, the nature of the work. I wasn't expecting a letter of poetry." Another man sitting in a chair near the window shifted his weight. He was older, with a silver mustache and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had lived long enough to believe that everything he thought was worth saying. "You seem like a sensible woman," he said. "So let me give you some sensible advice. Get back on that coach when it turns around." Lillian turned to look at him. "I appreciate the concern, but I've come a long way, and I have a job waiting for me." "Caleb Whitaker," the man said, as if the name itself was sufficient explanation. "What about him?" "He ain't right," the old man said quietly. "Hasn't been right in years. Lives up there alone, won't let nobody close, runs off anybody who comes near the place. Before you, he went through 2 hired hands in 6 weeks. One of them said the man didn't speak a single word to him for 5 days straight. Just watched him work and left food on the table like he was feeding a stray dog." "That doesn't sound threatening," Lillian said. "It sounds lonely." The 2 men exchanged a look. "You'll change your tune," the man behind the counter said finally. He reached under the counter and pulled out a piece of paper, a hand-drawn map, rough but readable. He slid it across to her without meeting her eyes. 7 miles north. Follow the creek bed when the road forks. Don't expect a welcome. She took the map. Thank you, she said. She walked out. Behind her, she heard the old man say low and certain to no one in particular, "Poor thing doesn't know what she's walking into." She hired a man with a wagon to take her the 7 miles. He was a young fellow named Denny, cheerful and gap-toothed, who seemed perfectly happy to carry the weight of the conversation himself, which suited her fine. He told her about the town, about the summer drought, about the price of cattle feed, and the preacher's new wife, and the dog that had bitten the sheriff twice last month. She let it wash over her and watched the landscape. She had grown up in Ohio in a house with 4 brothers and a mother who believed in hard work the way some people believe in religion, not out of joy, but out of necessity. Her father had died when she was 12, and from that point on, the family's survival had been a collective effort, shared and unromantic. She had never been the kind of woman who dreamed about riding off into sunsets or being swept off her feet. She was the kind of woman who knew how to preserve vegetables for winter and darn socks in the dark, and calculate how much flour you needed to stretch a single loaf across a week of meals. She was practical. She was not sentimental. But she had also lost her last position 6 months ago, abruptly, and through no fault of her own. And since then, every door she had knocked on had opened just long enough for someone to look her over and close it again. She was 25 and unmarried, and arrived from the East with no references and no family connections in the West. And that combination had proven to be a very specific kind of invisible. So when she had seen the ad, "Ranch work available, Harrow Creek, Montana territory, honest wages, apply by letter," she had written without hesitation. And when the reply came back brief and businesslike but not unkind, she had packed her one suitcase and not looked back. Whatever Caleb Whitaker was, he had offered her a job. That was more than anyone else had done. When Denny's wagon crested the final rise and the Whitaker ranch came into view, she felt something in her chest she hadn't expected. It was beautiful, not in a grand, imposing way, in a quiet, earned way. The main house was solid 2 stories, weathered wood, gone silver gray from years of sun and wind, a wide porch running the full length of the front. Behind it, a barn big enough to house a serious operation. 2 smaller outbuildings, a well-kept fence line running toward a creek that glittered in the morning light. There were horses in the pasture, 4 of them moving slow and easy through the dry grass. The kind of horses that told you the person who kept them actually knew what they were doing. Denny pulled the wagon to a stop at the end of the path leading to the house. "I'll leave you here," he said, and she didn't miss the fact that he didn't offer to drive her up closer. "That's fine," she said. She climbed down, took her suitcase, and paid him. He tipped his hat and turned the wagon around before she'd taken 10 steps toward the house. She had just reached the porch steps when the front door opened. House was taller than she'd expected. Not in an exaggerated way, just genuinely tall, the kind of tall that comes with a certain stillness, as if a man that size has learned long ago that he doesn't need to make himself larger to be noticed. He wore a work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked like he had been doing something with his hands before she arrived, because his jaw was set. The way a person's jaw sets when they've been interrupted in the middle of a task they'd rather have finished. He looked at her. She looked at him. Dark brown eyes. A face that had spent years in the sun and wind and hadn't bothered apologizing for it. Not a handsome face in the way that men in parlors were handsome, but a face with weight to it. A face that looked like it remembered things. "Miss Parker," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was an identification delivered flat. "Mr. Whitaker," she replied in exactly the same register. A silence stretched between them that she refused to be the first to fill. "You're younger than I expected," he said at last. "You're taller," she said. Something moved across his face that might have been surprise, or it might have been the beginning of something else she couldn't tell yet. It disappeared too fast to name. "Come inside," he said, and turned back through the door. She picked up her suitcase and followed. The house was clean. That was the first thing she noticed, and it surprised her. Given what the men in town had said about Caleb Whitaker, living alone and turning people away, She had expected disorder, the accumulated clutter of a man who had stopped caring about the space around him. But the main room was swept, the surfaces clear, the windows free of grime. It was spare, certainly. There was nothing decorative about it. No curtains on the windows, no paintings on the walls, no rug on the floor. Just the bones of a house furniture placed for function. Everything where it needed to be, and nothing where it didn't. He led her through to the kitchen, which was at the back of the house, and pointed to a door off the side passage. "That's your room," he said. "Got a window on the east side, towels on the hook. You can put your things in the chest." She looked at the door, then back at him. "Thank you," she said. He gave a single nod, as if the acknowledgement was noted and filed, and required no further response. Then he moved to the table, solid oak, scarred from years of use, and pulled out a piece of paper from his shirt pocket. He laid it on the table and smoothed it once with his palm. "This is what I need done," he said. "The basics: cooking, cleaning the house in general. I don't need someone waiting on me hand and foot. I need someone who can manage this place while I'm working the ranch. There are 6 hired men who come in at midday for a meal and at sundown for supper. Otherwise, the mornings and evenings are whatever you make of them." She stepped forward and read down the list. It was thorough and unsentimental, written in a hand that was surprisingly precise for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. "That's manageable," she said. "Good." He picked the paper up and tucked it back in his pocket. Then he looked at her directly, steadily, the way people look when they are about to say something they mean and don't want to be misunderstood. "I don't expect conversation," he said. "I don't have much use for it. You'll do your work and I'll do mine, and that's the arrangement." "That suits me," she said. Another silence. "The men know you're coming," he said. "I told them to treat you with respect. If there's trouble, you tell me directly." He paused. "There won't be trouble." She believed him. Not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it, quietly, without inflation, like a man stating a fact he'd already made certain of. "All right," she said. He turned toward the back door that led out to the yard. "Supper's at 6, he said without looking back. "I'll expect you to manage it starting tonight. There's food in the cellar, and the pantry is stocked." "I'll manage it," she said. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Lillian stood alone in the kitchen of a stranger's house in a valley she'd never seen before, and for the first time in months longer than that, maybe she felt something she didn't have a ready name for. Not happiness, not comfort, but something in the neighborhood of steadiness. The work was clear. The expectations were honest. The man didn't want her to be anything other than what she had come to be. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough. She put on her apron and got to work. The first week passed in the rhythm of tasks accomplished. She figured out the pantry and the cellar and the particular way the kitchen stove ran hot on the left side and needed to be managed accordingly. She learned which of the 6 ranch hands liked their coffee strong and which complained if the biscuits were too thick. She learned that the long table in the kitchen could seat 8 comfortably and 12 if nobody minded their elbows. She learned which floorboards on the stairs creaked and how the east window in her room let in a clean morning light that she had already decided was the best part of the day. She learned the shape of the house, its habits, and its silences. She learned less about Caleb Whitaker. He kept to the schedule he'd described with mechanical precision. He was gone before she started breakfast, appeared at midday to eat with his men. Sat at the head of the table, spoke when spoken to, offered nothing voluntary, and came in at sundown for supper, with the kind of deliberate quietness that a man develops when he has decided that the world has taken enough from him, that he doesn't intend to give it anything more to work with. He never ate alone with her. At mealtimes there were always others present. She wasn't sure whether that was deliberate or incidental, and she didn't ask. What she noticed, what she couldn't help noticing, because she was a woman who had always paid more attention to what people did than what they said, was that Caleb Whitaker was not what the people in town had told her he was. The old man in the general store had called him not right. The man behind the counter had let the name land like a stone dropping into still water. But nothing that had transpired in the first 7 days suggested anything dangerous or disturbing or wrong. What it suggested was a man who had drawn a clear circle around himself and enforced its boundaries with consistency. That wasn't dangerous. That was a person in pain who had learned how to manage it alone. She knew the difference. She had lived the difference. On the 8th day, she saw it for the first time. She was in the kitchen in the early afternoon, working through a pile of mending that one of the ranch hands had left outside her door, with a sheepish note when she heard a wagon come up the road. She looked out the window and saw a family man, woman, 3 small children, the kind of worn-out travel-weighted look of people who had been on a hard road for too long. The man climbed down and went to the barn. She went back to her mending. 20 minutes later, she heard the wagon leave. Later that evening, when she went to the cold cellar for potatoes, she noticed that 2 of the large cured hams she'd inventoried the previous week were gone. There had been a sack of dried beans beside them. That was gone too. She stood in the cellar and looked at the empty space on the shelf for a long moment. Then she went upstairs, and she didn't say anything about it at supper. It happened again 4 days later. Different family this time. A woman alone, 2 boys, a horse that was too thin. They came to the barn the same way Caleb went out to meet them. She watched from the window. They left 20 minutes later. Afterward, she checked the cellar. A side of salted pork, a jar of preserved fruit, a small sack of cornmeal. Gone. She said nothing, but on a Wednesday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after she'd arrived, she was carrying fresh bread out to the back porch to cool when she nearly walked straight into Caleb Whitaker coming around the corner of the house with a crate in his arms. He stopped. She stopped. They looked at each other. The crate held food. She could see through the wooden slats potatoes, wrapped cuts of meat, a cloth sack that smelled of dried herbs. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Hendersons have 6 children," he said finally. "Drought hit their farm bad this year." "I wasn't asking," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. She stepped aside. He walked past her, loaded the crate onto his horse, and rode off down the north road without another word. She stood on the porch and watched him go. She thought of the men in the general store, their certain easy certainty about who Caleb Whitaker was. He ain't right. She thought that the problem with certainty was that it could stop you from seeing things clearly. It was in the 4th week that she found the photograph. She hadn't been snooping. She would say that to herself clearly and without apology, because it was true. She had been cleaning, deep cleaning, the kind she did on Fridays when the hired men were out on the far pasture, and she was moving things off the high shelf in the main room to wipe it down. There wasn't much up there. A lantern, a spare hat, an old tin tobacco box, and pushed back against the wall where it couldn't easily be seen from the floor, a small wooden frame lying face down. She set the frame upright. A woman looked back at her from the photograph. Young, dark-haired, with a smile that looked like it had been born easy, the kind of smile that didn't have to work for itself. She was holding an infant just a few months old by the look of it, and the way she held the child said everything about the kind of woman she'd been. Her arms were sure and gentle, and completely certain. Lillian held the photograph for a long time. She put it back exactly as she'd found it. Face down, pushed against the wall. She climbed down from the stool, finished wiping the shelf around it, and didn't touch it again. But she thought about it. She thought about what a man does with a photograph he can't throw away, but can't bear to look at either. She thought about what kind of loss earns that. She found out through May Sutherland. May was the wife of one of the ranch hands, a broad, cheerful woman who sometimes came to help with laundry on heavy weeks, and who treated silence, the way some people treat empty plates, as something that needed to be filled immediately and without hesitation. They were working together over the wash basins on a Tuesday morning when May, in between a story about her youngest son and an observation about the church roof, said almost as an aside, the way people deliver information they've been sitting on for a while. "You know about his wife, I reckon." Lillian kept her hands moving in the water. "No one's told me anything." May was quiet for a moment. Then, not unkindly, with the gentleness of someone who understood that some information deserves to be carried carefully. "Eleanor. That was her name. She was from a good family over in Helena. She and Caleb married young. She wasn't more than 19, I think. He built that house for her. Every room." May paused. She passed in the winter of '81, the baby with her. The sounds of the morning continued around them. Birds, the distant lowing of cattle, the slow wet rhythm of the washboards. He had the ranch hands leave for a week after the funeral. May continued, her voice lower now. When they came back, he'd moved everything of hers to the barn. Then he moved it again somewhere. Nobody knows where. He never spoke her name to anyone after that. Not once. Lillian said nothing. He's not a bad man, May said quietly but firmly, as if she was making a record of something. I know what they say in town, but they say it because they don't understand him, and they don't understand him because he won't let them. There's the difference between a man who's hard and a man who's broken. She looked sideways at Lillian. Caleb Whitaker is the second kind. Lillian wrung out a shirt and reached for the next one. I know, she said. May looked at her. How? Lillian thought of the photograph face down on the high shelf. She thought of the crate of food loaded onto a horse for a family the town didn't think twice about. She thought of the way he moved through his own house with the careful quietness of someone who has learned not to disturb the air too much in case the grief still waiting in corners decides to notice him. Because that's what grief looks like, she said, when it's been there long enough to get organized. May said nothing for a moment, then she nodded, and they kept working. The first real conversation they had, the first one that was something other than logistics or household business, happened by accident. It was late on a Thursday evening, well past supper, and Lillian had stayed up working through a stack of household accounts she'd been asked to organize. She heard the kitchen door and looked up to find Caleb coming in from the dark later than usual, his shirt damp and his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a day that had asked too much of a person. He saw her at the table. He stopped. Don't let me disturb you, he said. You're not, she said. There's coffee still hot if you want it. He looked at the pot on the stove, looked at the cup she gestured toward on the shelf. He got the cup. He poured the coffee. He sat down at the far end of the table, not next to her, not across from her, but angled, as if negotiating the exact right amount of proximity that wasn't isolation, but wasn't intimacy either. She kept working on the accounts. He drank his coffee. Several minutes passed. You have good handwriting, he said. She looked up. He was looking at the ledger page, not at her. My mother insisted on it, she said. She thought a woman with poor handwriting was like a carpenter with dull tools, no excuse for it. A pause. Smart woman, he said. She was. Another silence, but a different quality of silence than the ones that had come before. Less enforced. You're from Ohio, he said. She looked up again. He was still looking at the table, but there was something less shuttered in the line of his face. Born there, she said. Grew up there. Left because there was nothing left to stay for. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Family, he said. My brothers all moved on, she said. Mother passed 2 years ago. After that it was just a town I used to live in. He nodded. One slow nod like he understood this in a way that didn't need to be explained. She turned a page of the ledger. You built this place yourself, she said. A pause. Most of it, he said. Bought the land, built the house and barn over 2 years. Hired help for the heavy work. It shows, she said. He looked at her now. She kept her eyes on the page. That it was built to last, she said. Not just built to sell or built to make a point. Built to live in. Something shifted in the room. She felt it without looking up some small, careful thing. Yeah, he said quietly. He finished his coffee. He stood, rinsed the cup at the basin, set it on the shelf with a precision that said something about who he was without needing commentary. Good night, Miss Parker, he said. Good night, Mr. Whitaker, she said. He walked out. She sat for a long time after not looking at the ledger. She was thinking about a man who had built a house to live in and then had to figure out how to keep living in it after the life he'd built it for was gone. She was thinking that some kinds of courage don't look anything like what people usually call courage. They look like showing up. Every day, just showing up. She had been at the ranch for 5 weeks when the stranger rode in. He came on a fine horse, too fine for the dust roads of Harrow Creek Valley, wearing a suit that had no business being this far from a city. He tied up at the front of the house, in the middle of a Thursday morning when she was the only one on the property, all the ranch hands out on the south pasture, and Caleb checking fence lines along the creek. He knocked on the front door with the knuckle of a man who is very certain of being answered. Lillian opened it. He was perhaps 50, with a heavy, well-fed look and pale, watchful eyes. He held his hat in one hand and smiled at her with teeth that were too even to be entirely sincere. "Good morning," he said. "I'm looking for Caleb Whitaker. I understand this is his property." "It is," she said. "He's not on the premises right now." "I see." The smile didn't change. "And you are?" "His housekeeper," she said. "Of course." He glanced past her into the house, a quick cataloging look that she didn't like. "I'm Gerald Crane," he said, "of Crane Land Acquisitions based out of Denver. I'm in the area making inquiries about properties, and Mr. Whitaker's ranch has come to my attention as a particularly interesting proposition. Perhaps you could tell him I called." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, held it out to her with the delicate precision of a man who has handed out cards to 1,000 people and knows exactly what the gesture means about the gap between himself and whoever receives it. She took it. "I'll tell him," she said. "Much obliged." The smile again wide and fixed and telling her nothing. "Tell him I'll be in the area for the next several weeks. I do hope he'll be open to a conversation. What I have to offer is something a reasonable man would find very difficult to refuse." He settled his hat back on his head. "Good day, Miss Parker," she said. "Miss Parker." A small bow, practiced and meaningless. "Do give him my regards." He walked back to his horse. He rode off down the road without hurrying. The way a man rides when he's comfortable with the assumption that things will eventually go his way. Lillian stood in the doorway and watched him go. She looked down at the card in her hand. Gerald Crane. Crane Land Acquisitions. She turned it over. There was nothing on the back. She went inside. She set the card on the kitchen table next to the pepper grinder where Caleb would be sure to see it. She went back to her work. But she kept thinking about those pale, watchful eyes and the way he had glanced past her into the house. Not the look of a man assessing a property. The look of a man already calculating what it would cost to take something that belonged to someone else. She had seen that look before. She knew exactly what it meant. And she knew with a certainty she couldn't yet explain that whatever Gerald Crane's proposition was, it was not something that would be good for Caleb Whitaker. Not good at all. Caleb came back from the fence line later than usual that afternoon, and Lillian heard him before she saw him. The particular sound of a man moving through his own property, with the certainty of someone who has walked the same ground 10,000 times and stopped needing to think about it. She was at the stove when he came through the kitchen door, and she let him settle, let him hang his hat and pull off his gloves before she said anything at all. "Someone came by this morning," she said without turning around. "Left his card." She heard him cross to the table. A pause. "Crane," he said. It wasn't a question. She turned. He was holding the card between two fingers, looking at it the way a person looks at something they already know is trouble and are just confirming the shape of it. "You know him," she said. "I know of him." He set the card back down on the table flat, as if he didn't want it taking up more space than necessary. "He's been buying up land across 3 counties, mostly from people who couldn't hold on after the drought." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "He's been sending letters here for 2 months. I haven't answered any of them." He said what he had to offer would be difficult for a reasonable man to refuse. Caleb looked up at her. "That's the thing about men like Crane," he said quietly. "They always think every man has a price. They just spend their time figuring out what it is." "And what do you tell them when they think that about you?" He looked back at this card. "I don't tell them anything," he said. "I just make sure they're wrong." She turned back to the stove. But something in the way he'd said it, not with anger, not with bluster, just with the flat, settled certainty of a man who had already made up his mind about something and didn't feel the need to explain it further, stayed with her long after supper was cleared and the kitchen was quiet again. The ranch hands noticed things the way men who work close together in hard conditions always notice things. They didn't say much about it directly. They were working men, not gossips. But Lillian had been around people long enough to read the small calibrations. The way a conversation didn't stop when she walked into the barn looking for a tool. The way Pete Alcott, the oldest of the six, had started leaving his cup at her end of the table instead of fetching his own refill. The way Tommy Walsh, who couldn't have been more than 20, had started tipping his hat to her every morning with the elaborate care of someone who has recently decided that manners matter. She didn't make anything of it, but she noticed. What she also noticed was that Caleb watched his men the same way she watched them cataloging steady, and that something in the way he watched shifted subtly whenever one of them talked to her. Not possessively, not with the territorial suspicion she might have expected from certain kinds of men. It was quieter than that. More like someone standing slightly closer to something without entirely meaning to. She told herself it didn't mean anything. She was not at the ranch to mean things. She was here to work. The problem was that things kept happening that made that particular rule harder to hold. It was a Friday evening, nearly 6 weeks in, and she was carrying the last of the supper dishes in from the table. When she heard it, a sound from outside that was wrong in a way she felt before she understood it. A high, sharp cry, human and frightened and cut short. She set the dishes down on the counter and was already moving toward the back door when it opened, and Tommy Walsh came through it, his face pale under his summer tan. "Miss Parker," he said. "Pete's down. Horse threw him against the fence rail. Mr. Whitaker's with him, but we need—" She was already past him. Pete Alcott was on the ground near the far pasture fence on his back, one of the other ranch hands kneeling beside him. Caleb was there too, crouched on Pete's other side, his hand flat on the older man's shoulder, and the look on Caleb's face was one she hadn't seen on him before. Not closed, not guarded, but stripped of all that careful architecture. Just a man afraid for someone he cared about. "Pete," Caleb was saying steady and low, "stay still. Don't try to sit up." "I'm fine," Pete said, which he clearly was not, his voice thin, and his face the color of old ash. "His shoulder," one of the other men said. "I think it might be broke." Lillian moved in, and the men made room without being asked. She knelt beside Pete and looked at the shoulder. The angle of it was wrong, the kind of wrong that meant dislocation at minimum. She'd seen it before. One of her brothers had gone off a horse at 16, and she had been the one in the yard when it happened, their mother not yet home from the neighbors. "Pete," she said, "look at me." He looked at her. His eyes were focused, which was good. "Does it hurt to breathe?" she asked. "Some," he said. "Ribs." She looked across at Caleb. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely name. Not deference exactly. More like someone reassessing the dimensions of a space they thought they already knew. "He needs a doctor," she said. "The shoulder's out and the ribs need looking at. But he shouldn't be moved the way he is." She looked back at Pete. "Can you move your fingers on the left hand?" Pete moved them. Slow, but they moved. "Good," she said. She stood and looked at Tommy Walsh. "Get a board from the barn, flat long enough for him to lie on, and bring every spare blanket in the bunkhouse." She looked at Caleb. "Is there a doctor in town?" "Doc Mercer," Caleb said. He was already standing. "I'll ride for him." "Go fast," she said. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he was gone, and the sound of a horse going hard down the road was already fading before the other men had finished moving. Doc Mercer arrived within the hour, a compact, efficient man in his 60s, who examined Pete with the economical thoroughness of someone who had been doing his job long enough to dispense with the theatrical components. He confirmed the dislocated shoulder and 2 cracked ribs and set about the work of addressing them with matter-of-fact competence, while Lillian held the lamp and the ranch hands waited out in the yard. Caleb stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse where they'd moved Pete, watching. When Doc Mercer was done, and Pete was settled and medicated into something approaching sleep, the doctor gathered his bag and looked up at Lillian. "Good thinking's on the board," he said. "Moving him wrong could have made the ribs worse." He paused. "You've done this before?" "Once," she said. "A long time ago." He nodded. He looked at Caleb in the doorway. He needs rest. A week at minimum. No riding, no heavy work. I'll come back in 3 days. Then, almost as an afterthought, somebody should sit with him tonight. I will, Lillian said. Caleb looked at her. You don't have to, he started. I know I don't have to, she said simply and without edge. I'm offering. He stopped. Doc Mercer picked up his bag and left, and then it was just the two of them in the doorway of the bunkhouse with Pete breathing slow and medicated behind them, and the summer night pressing in warm and cricket loud from outside. You should sleep, Caleb said finally. I'll sleep in the chair, she said. It won't be the first time. He looked at her for a long moment. Not the way he usually looked at her, or rather, not the way he usually managed to make it seem like he wasn't looking at her. This was different. This was a man looking directly at a person and seeing them and not trying to pretend otherwise. All right, he said. He turned and went back to the main house. She pulled the chair close to Pete's cot, adjusted the lamp to low, and settled in. In the quiet, she thought about the look on Caleb's face when he'd been crouched beside Pete, the way the walls had come down for just a moment. The way a man who had learned to protect himself from almost everything hadn't been able to protect himself from that, from the simple, irreducible terror of watching someone he valued get hurt. She thought that maybe what the town called coldness was actually something else entirely. She thought that maybe the distance Caleb kept between himself and the world was not cruelty. It was grief that had learned to wear sensible shoes and keep working. She did not expect what happened the next morning. She was in the kitchen earlier than usual after the night in the chair, moving through the breakfast preparations with the automatic efficiency of someone running on less sleep than was strictly ideal when she heard his step on the stair. Caleb came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her already at the stove. You should have slept, he said. I did sleep, she said. Just not horizontal. He didn't answer that. He went to the basin and washed his hands and face, and when he straightened and dried his hands on the towel, he turned and looked at her with a directness she had come to recognize as the thing he did instead of preamble. I owe you an apology, he said. She turned from the stove and looked at him. For what? For not making it clear enough when you arrived that you were... He paused, choosing the word with part of this place, not just help that passes through. Another pause. What you did last night for Pete, the way you handled it, that wasn't part of your arrangement here. Neither was leaving food on the Hendersons' doorstep, she said, but you do that. He blinked. She turned back to the stove. Mr. Whitaker, she said, I didn't come here looking for a ledger to balance. I came here to do honest work for honest pay. Sometimes honest work is cooking supper, and sometimes it's sitting with a hurt man through the night. I don't see the difference. A long silence. Then, and she wasn't sure she'd heard it right, wasn't sure she hadn't imagined it. She heard him say very quietly, almost to himself, Where did you come from, Miss Parker? It wasn't a question. It was something else. Something she carefully did not examine too closely. Ohio, she said, and kept cooking. Pete recovered slowly and grumpily, which the other hands seemed to find reassuring. He's back to normal if he's complaining. Tommy Walsh reported with evident relief. Lillian brought his meals to the bunkhouse for the first 4 days and checked his progress with the methodical attention she applied to everything she cared about, and Pete submitted to this with the particular mixture of embarrassment and gratitude that men of his generation felt about being cared for by women they respected. On the 5th day, he was sitting up and eating under his own management, and she was about to leave him to it when he said without looking up from his plate, He doesn't talk about her, you know, Eleanor. He never has, not to any of us. She paused in the doorway. I know, she said, but he talks to you. Pete looked up now. His eyes were shrewd and not unkind. I've seen it. In the evenings. He stays in the kitchen sometimes after supper. He never used to do that. Not once in 3 years. She didn't answer. I'm not saying it as a caution, Pete said. I'm saying it as... He seemed to look for the word. Information. From someone who's been watching that man try to carry too much weight for too long. He looked back at his plate. He's a good man, whatever you've heard. Whatever they say in town. He's the best man I've ever worked for, and I've worked for a lot. She stood in the doorway another moment. "I know that too," she said. She went back to the house. Gerald Crane came back on a Tuesday 3 days after his first visit, and this time Caleb was there. Lillian was in the kitchen when she heard the voices on the front porch. Crane's smooth city-finished cadences carrying easily through the walls, and Caleb's low flat responses. She didn't move from the kitchen. It was not her conversation, but she could hear it. "A man in your position ought to consider the practical realities," Crane was saying, his voice pleasant and weighted with the kind of patience that is not actually patience, but the performance of it. 3 dry summers in a row. I've seen what that does to operations like yours. The cost of feed, the loss of cattle weight. It adds up. "My operation is fine," Caleb said. "Today it is. But next summer, if the drought holds, then I'll manage next summer," Caleb said. "Same as I've managed every summer before it." A pause. "I'm offering you a very fair price," Crane said. "Significantly above the assessed value. You could take that money and go anywhere. Start fresh. A man who's been through what you've been through." A careful pause. "Deserves a fresh start, don't you think?" The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man deciding how much anger he is going to allow himself. "Get off my porch, Mr. Crane," Caleb said. I said get off my porch." There was the sound of boots on wood, a horse being untied. Then Crane's voice again, still pleasant, still patient, but with something harder underneath it now, like rock under a thin layer of soil. "I'll be back, Mr. Whitaker. Men like you always come around eventually. It's just a matter of time and circumstances." The sound of hooves moving away. Then quiet. Lillian kept her hands moving in the basin, washing the breakfast dishes, with steady, unhurried strokes. A minute later, she heard the front door close, heard his footsteps cross the main room, and stop in the kitchen doorway. She looked up. His jaw was set. His eyes were the kind of flat that covered something hot underneath. "He'll come back," she said. "I know," he said. "And the next time he'll bring something more than a price offer." Caleb looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because men like him don't take no for an answer on principle," she said. "They take it as information. They go away and find the shape of the weakness, and they come back through it." She dried her hands. "He said something about what you've been through. He's looked into you. He knows things, or he thinks he does, and he's keeping them for when a fair price doesn't work." Caleb was very still. "You notice that," he said. "I notice things," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I've started to understand that about you." And then something changed in his face, not dramatically, not the way it changed in stories where people break open all at once and everything spills out. Just a slight easing. The way ice sounds when it starts to shift in early spring, not breaking, just beginning to consider the possibility. I walked to the table and sat down, and he didn't say anything for a moment, and she went back to drying the dishes, and the kitchen was quiet in its morning way. Then he said, "There are things Crane could use, if he found them." She didn't stop what she was doing. "You don't have to tell me." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." He looked at the table. 3 years ago, before Eleanor died, there was a man, a business partner. I trusted him more than I should have. We had a land deal together, me and him and 2 others. It fell through badly. There were accusations. Nothing proven, nothing charged, but in a town like this, accusations are enough. His voice was even and low, and utterly without self-pity, which somehow made it harder to hear than bitterness would have. People believed what they heard. I didn't fight it. Eleanor was sick by then, and then she was gone, and after that I didn't much care what people thought of me. Lillian set down the dish in her hands. "What was the man's name?" she asked. He looked up. "Why?" "Because Crane didn't come here by accident," she said. "And whoever pointed him at this ranch, they knew enough about you to think you'd be a soft target." A long pause. "Harlan Marsh," Caleb said. "He's in Denver now." She filed the name away without showing that she had. "Is there anything written down?" she said. "From that time. Letters, documents, anything that shows what actually happened." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, Not quite wariness, not quite something else. As if she had asked a question that opened a door he hadn't expected to find in this particular room. Maybe, he said carefully. I haven't looked at it in 3 years. I think, she said quietly, you might want to. He held her gaze. Outside, the summer morning was going about its business. Birds, cattle, the distant voice of one of the ranch hands calling to another. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day that had in the space of a single conversation become something else. Miss Parker, he said, and his voice was different than it had been even 10 minutes ago. Lower, less barricaded with a quality she had to concentrate to name, and finally arrived at trust, careful and new and clearly unaccustomed to daylight. Why do you care what happens to this ranch? She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things, not reaching for the easy answer, but looking for the true one. Because it's a good place, she said at last. Built to last, by someone who built it to live in. She met his eyes. That's worth something. It deserves to be defended. He was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and pushed back the chair, and when he looked at her again, it was with the particular expression of a man who has spent a very long time standing alone in a space, and has just realized he is not at this moment standing alone. I'll look for the documents tonight, he said. I'll make coffee, she said. And neither of them said anything more about it because neither of them needed to. She was beating rugs on the back line late that afternoon when Tommy Walsh came around the corner of the house moving faster than the heat warranted and stopped short when he saw her. Miss Parker, he said, slightly breathless. You seen Mr. Whitaker? He went to the south pasture this morning, she said, dropping the rug beater. What's wrong? Man in town, Emmett Gruber from the land registry. Tommy's voice was tight. He's saying there's a petition going around. About the Whitaker ranch. About the deed. She went very still. What about the deed? She said. He's saying someone filed a challenge, claiming there's an irregularity in the original land grant, from before. Tommy swallowed. If it goes through the ranch, could go to county administration. And if it goes to county administration, Crane buys it from the county, she said. Tommy stared at her. How'd you... Go get Mr. Whitaker, she said. Right now, go fast. He went. She stood between the laundry lines in the afternoon heat with wet cloth snapping around her, and thought about pale, watchful eyes, and a card with nothing on the back, and a man who had said it's just a matter of time and circumstances. She thought about a house built to last. She thought about all the things a man carries when he's decided the world can think what it likes about him, and how those things become weapons in the hands of people who are looking for a way in. She picked up the rug beater and finished the rug with swift, hard strokes. Then she went inside and started thinking about what she was going to do about Harlan Marsh. Caleb arrived back at the house 20 minutes after Tommy, his horse covering the distance with the urgency that comes from riding a man who is not panicking, but is moving with the particular controlled speed of someone who has already assessed the situation and decided that speed is the correct response. He came into the kitchen where she was waiting Tommy behind him, and she told him what Tommy had told her, and watched his face do the thing she was coming to recognize as his version of a storm. Nothing visible on the surface, but everything underneath moving. It's Crane, Caleb said. It's Crane, she confirmed. He can't buy it from you, so he's going to try to take it out from under you through the county. She paused. What I need to know is whether the deed is clean, whether there's anything in the original land grant that someone could actually challenge. He looked at her. Why would you know to ask that? My father had a property dispute when I was 11, she said. It dragged on for 2 years. I watched the whole thing. I learned more about land law than any child should have to. She kept her voice level. Is the deed clean, Mr. Whitaker? The deed is clean, he said. The grant was filed correctly. I have every paper. Then this is about the accusation, she said. From 3 years ago. Crane is going to use it to muddy the record. Make it look like a man of questionable character filed a questionable grant. Even if it doesn't hold legally, it buys him time. And time might be what he's actually after. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, How do you know this much about how men like Crane work? She met his eyes. Because I've had men like Crane make decisions about my life before, she said, and I paid close attention to how they did it, so that the next time I'd know what I was looking at. Something moved in his face. You said Harlan Marsh, she continued steadily. He's in Denver. Crane is based in Denver. That's not a coincidence, and you know it isn't. No, Caleb said quietly. It isn't. So those documents you said you'd look for tonight. She kept her voice even, not pressing, not afraid. We should look for them now. He held her gaze for a long-waited moment. Outside, Tommy Walsh was very quiet with the self-conscious stillness of a young man who has suddenly realized he is in a room where something larger than himself is happening. Tommy, Caleb said without looking away from her. Go check on Pete. Tell the others to stay close tonight. Yes, sir, Tommy said and went. And then it was just the two of them in the kitchen, and Caleb Whitaker looked at Lillian Parker the way a man looks at someone who has just proven themselves trustworthy, in a way he didn't fully allow himself to expect, and said, Come with me. She followed him out of the kitchen, and up the stairs, and into the room at the end of the hall that she had never seen open before, and when he unlocked the door and stepped inside, and she stepped in after him, she understood at once what she was looking at. It was Eleanor's room. Or it had been. The furniture was covered in sheeting white, and still in the late afternoon light. But the bookshelf along one wall was full, and beneath the window there was a locked chest, and Caleb went to the chest with the careful movements of a man visiting a place he has not been in a long time, and is not sure yet whether he can manage. He crouched. He had a key on his watch chain. He opened the chest. Inside, neat and ordered and wrapped in oilcloth, were papers, letters, documents, a ledger. All of it preserved as carefully as anything she had ever seen preserved by a person who needed to keep something safe but could not bear to look at it. She came and knelt beside him, and they began to look. They worked until the light went, and she had to fetch the lamp. They worked through supper, which Tommy brought to the door of the room on a tray without being asked, which told her something about Tommy Walsh that she filed away warmly. And somewhere in the third hour of reading, her hand still on a letter, and the lamp turned low between them, she found it. Not the deed, not the land grant. Something better. A letter from Harlan Marsh dated 4 years ago, before the deal, before the accusations, before any of it, in which Marsh, writing to a third party whose name she didn't yet know, described in careful, incriminating detail a plan to structure the land deal in such a way that when it collapsed, Caleb Whitaker would be left holding the liability and the blame. She read it twice. Then she handed it to Caleb without a word. She watched him read it. She watched his face go very still, that particular stillness that in him had come to mean not nothing, but everything. And she watched him reach the end of the letter and read it again from the top, as if making certain that what he was reading was what he thought it was. Then he looked at her. He planned it, Caleb said. Quiet, level. All that careful architecture holding steady even now. From the beginning. He planned the whole thing. Yes, she said. 3 years, he said. 3 years I let this town think. You know now, she said. He looked at the letter in his hand. She looked at him. In the lamplight, with the sheeted furniture around them, and the chest open between them, and the weight of 3 years of unnecessary shame sitting in his hands on a single sheet of paper, Caleb Whitaker looked like what he actually was, a man who had been carrying something that was never his to carry, and had just been handed proof of it. She did not reach out. She did not offer comfort in any of the ways that comfort is usually offered. She simply stayed where she was present, steady, real, and let him have the moment without rushing it toward anything. After a long time, he folded the letter with great care, and he said very quietly, Thank you, Miss Parker. We're not done yet, she said. He looked at her. Crane comes back, she said, and now we know why. And we know where it comes from, which means we know how to stop it. He held the letter. How? He said. She looked at him steadily. This woman who had come west with nothing but a suitcase and a determination to survive, who had learned from watching her father's ruin that knowledge was the only weapon that couldn't be taken from you if you were careful enough about where you kept it. We take it to someone who can make it matter, she said, before Crane makes his next move. The lamp burned steady between them, and Caleb Whitaker looked at Lillian Parker, and for the first time in 3 years, he did not look like a man who was alone. They rode into Harrow Creek the next morning, before the heat had fully committed to the day, Caleb on his gray and Lillian beside him, on the smaller bay mare he'd saddled without asking whether she could ride, which told her something about how the night had changed things between them. She could ride. She'd told him so when he brought the horse around, and he'd nodded once, and that was the end of it. The letter was in the inside pocket of his jacket. She had made copies by hand the night before. 2 of them, word for word, the way her mother had taught her to copy documents that mattered, sitting at the kitchen table, while Caleb read through the rest of the chest's contents, with the systematic focus of a man who has decided that if he's going to open a wound, he'll clean it out completely. She had not asked him what else he found. She had simply made her copies, folded them into the oilcloth she'd taken from the kitchen, and placed one inside the chest and one inside her own dress pocket before she went to bed. He hadn't asked why she made 2 copies. She hadn't explained. Some things between careful people don't need explaining. The main street of Harrow Creek had its usual morning population. A few horses at the post, a woman carrying a basket, 2 men talking outside the barber shop with the unhurried ease of men who have no immediate place to be. They looked up when Caleb and Lillian rode in. The looking was not subtle. The kind of town that noticed everything and filed it, cross-referenced it, and had an opinion about it before you'd finished tying your horse. Caleb didn't look at them. Lillian did. Briefly, steadily, just long enough to register the shape of the attention and what was underneath it, which was mostly surprise. Caleb Whitaker in town was apparently unusual enough on its own. Caleb Whitaker in town with a woman riding beside him was apparently something else entirely. He tied up outside a narrow building set between the land registry and a boot repair shop with a painted sign above the door that read, "Arthur Dean, Attorney at Law." He dismounted and held the mare's head while she climbed down, and the gesture was so natural that she almost missed it. A man who in the course of one evening and one lamplit floor, covered in old documents, had quietly reclassified her from employee to something he wasn't willing to let get jostled. She noticed. She said nothing about it. "Dean is the best lawyer in 3 counties, Caleb said as they moved toward the door. "He's not cheap, and he's not easy, and he doesn't care whose feelings he manages along the way. But if there's a legal case to be made, he'll find it, and he won't drop it." "Does he know you?" she asked. A slight pause. "He knew Eleanor's family." She absorbed that. "Then he already knows more than most," she said. He opened the door. Arthur Dean was a thin man of perhaps 60, with wire spectacles and the deeply skeptical expression of someone who has spent decades listening to people's problems and has concluded that most of them were avoidable. He looked up from his desk when they came in, and his expression went through a fast, invisible sequence: recognition, surprise, something that might have been relief before it settled back into professional neutrality. "Caleb Whitaker," he said, not warmly, but not coldly either. "The way you say the name of a person you have been wondering about." "Dean," Caleb said. Dean's eyes moved to Lillian with frank assessing intelligence, the look of a man who reads people for a living and is very good at it. "Miss Parker," she said before he could ask. "I'm working at the Whitaker Ranch, and I'm the one who found what we've come to show you." Dean looked at Caleb. "She found it," Caleb confirmed. Dean gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Sit down," he said. Caleb laid the letter on the desk in front of him without preamble. Dean picked it up. He read it once quickly, the way a person reads when they're establishing the shape of a thing. Then he read it again more slowly, and his expression did something complicated that ended in a stillness that was different from his usual skepticism. It was the stillness of a man who has just recognized a very specific kind of animal in a place he hadn't expected to find one. "Where did this come from?" he said. "A locked chest," Caleb said. "I hadn't looked at the papers in it since Eleanor died. Harlan Marsh wrote this 4 years ago. The date is on it." Dean set the letter down very carefully, as if it were something that might shift or vanish if handled incorrectly. He took off his spectacles, cleaned them on his shirt, and put them back on. A man's way of gathering himself. "You know what this is," he said. It wasn't a question. "Premeditated fraud," Lillian said. Dean looked at her. Exactly, he said, and there was something in his voice that might in a different man have been approval. This letter establishes intent. It establishes a conspiracy before the fact, combined with the actual record of the deal and the accusations that followed. He paused. This doesn't just clear your name, Caleb. This reverses the entire picture. The question is whether Marsh is still accessible and whether there's corroborating evidence. He's in Denver, Lillian said. And Gerald Crane is also in Denver. Dean looked at her again. This time the look lasted longer. Say that again, he said. Gerald Crane of Crane Land Acquisitions. He's been to the ranch twice in the past week pressuring Mr. Whitaker to sell. He referenced carefully but clearly knowledge of the accusations against Mr. Whitaker from 3 years ago. He used the phrase "what you've been through." A man who's simply looking to buy land doesn't know that kind of detail unless someone with personal knowledge gave it to him. Dean picked up the letter again. You think Marsh and Crane are connected, he said. I think Crane came to this valley because someone told him which properties had vulnerable owners, she said. And I think Harlan Marsh is a very good candidate for who that someone was. The office was quiet. Outside, the sounds of the street continued. Horses' voices, an ordinary morning in a small Montana town that had no idea what was happening 20 feet away in a narrow office between a land registry and a boot shop. And now Crane has filed a challenge to the deed, Caleb said. We heard about it yesterday. Land registry petition, claiming an irregularity in the original grant. Dean set the letter down again. His face had done the transition from skeptical to focused in the way a hunting dog's head comes up when it catches a scent, everything aligned toward the same point. He moved faster than I would have expected, he said almost to himself. Which means he already had the petition prepared before you refused him. He came to your ranch not expecting to actually persuade you. He looked at Caleb. He came to establish the meeting, to have a witness that he'd approached you in good faith before he moved legally. He was building his record. He was setting a stage, Lillian said. Yes. Dean looked at her steadily. Miss Parker, where did you work before the Whitaker Ranch? Various household positions, she said. And before that I helped manage my father's business correspondence for 4 years. He had 2 disputes over property and a contract fraud case. I was present for all of it. That explains the copies, Caleb said quietly beside her. She glanced at him. He was looking at her with an expression she had learned to recognize, now the one that wasn't quite surprise anymore, but was still something close to it. The expression of a man who keeps finding more room in a space he thought he'd already fully mapped. You made copies of the letter, Dean said. Last night, she said. One is in the chest at the ranch. One is on my person. She reached into her dress pocket and placed the folded oilcloth on the desk beside the original. Dean looked at the 2 documents side by side for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. You found yourself a remarkable housekeeper, he said. Caleb's eyes didn't leave Lillian. I know, he said. They were back on the street 20 minutes later. Dean already moving on the deed challenge through channels that he explained with the calm assurance of a man who has navigated these waters many times he could access before Crane's petition had time to gain traction. The letter would be filed with the county records by end of day, which would create a legal complication for anyone trying to proceed with a deed challenge against a man whose reputation was suddenly and verifiably contested by documentary evidence. It wasn't over. Dean had been clear about that. It was the beginning of a process that would take weeks, possibly months. Marsh would have to be contacted. Evidence would need corroborating. There were other parties named in Marsh's letter whose positions would need to be accounted for. But the ground had shifted. Lillian felt it the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives, not in anything visible, but in the air itself. Something was different. She was walking back toward the horses when she heard it. Well, I'll be. She turned. A woman was standing on the boardwalk across the street, 60s stout, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and was now just formidable. She was looking at Caleb with an expression Lillian couldn't immediately classify. Caleb had gone still. Mrs. Alderman, he said. Haven't seen you in town in I don't know how long, the woman said. She came across the street toward them with the unhurried authority of a woman who has long since stopped worrying about whether her approach is welcome. She looked at Lillian. "This your housekeeper I've been hearing about." "Lillian Parker," Lillian said. "Ruth Alderman." The woman's eyes moved back to Caleb with a directness that was not unkind. "You doing all right, Caleb?" A pause. "Getting there," he said. Something moved across Ruth Alderman's face. Something old and complicated. The expression of a person who carries a guilt they've never quite figured out how to set down. "I heard about the petition," she said, her voice lower now. "Crane's been talking to people. I don't like it." "Dean's handling it," Caleb said. "Good." She looked at him for another moment. "I should have said something back then, 3 years ago, when people were saying things about you. I knew Harlan Marsh wasn't. I knew something wasn't right about him, and I didn't say so, and I've thought about that more than once since." She said it plainly, without decoration, a woman making a statement of fact about her own failing. "I'm sorry for that." The street went about its business around them. Caleb looked at Ruth Alderman for a long, quiet moment. "I appreciate it," he said. Not warmly, not coldly. Honestly. Ruth nodded. She looked at Lillian one more time with a gaze that was thoroughly assessing and apparently satisfied with what it found. "You be careful with that Crane," she said. "He's not just after land. There's something about him. Men come through this valley following his interests, asking questions. The kind of questions that aren't about property values." She paused. "Just be careful." She walked back across the street. Lillian watched her go. "Who is she?" she asked quietly. "She was Eleanor's Sunday school teacher," Caleb said. "Growing up." Lillian looked at his profile, the set of his jaw. The way he was looking after Ruth Alderman with an expression that had too many things in it to separate out cleanly. "She meant it," Lillian said. "The apology." "I know," he said. They untied the horses and rode back toward the ranch, and the town watched them go, and Lillian thought about Ruth Alderman's warning men asking questions, not about property values, and felt the particular unease of someone who has just understood that what they're dealing with is larger than the shape they'd originally traced for it. The telegram arrived that afternoon. Tommy brought it from town, his face carrying the news before he said a word. Young men who are not practiced at concealment wear their anxiety plainly, and Tommy Walsh at 19 was an open book of a person in most respects. "For you, Mr. Whitaker," he said, holding it out. "Denny from the telegraph office said it came in around noon. Said the man who sent it paid triple the rate for urgent delivery." Caleb took it. "Read it." His face did nothing for 10 full seconds. Then he handed it to Lillian without a word. She read it. The telegram was from Denver. The sender's name was listed only as a set of initials, HFM, but the content was clear enough. It said, "I know what you found. Meet me at the Harrow Creek Station Thursday noon, or what you have means nothing. Come alone." She looked up. Caleb was watching her read it. "Marsh," she said. "Has to be," he said. "He knows about the letter," she said. "Which means Crane told him. Which means Crane knows we went to Dean this morning." "Someone in town," Caleb said. Flat, certain, his voice stripped of everything except the fact. "Or someone watching Dean's office," she said. Tommy was very still, the way young men go still when they realize that the thing happening around them is genuinely serious. "What do you want to do?" Lillian said. Caleb folded the telegram. "I want to know why Marsh would warn me," he said. "He spent 4 years letting me carry blame he manufactured. Why surface now? Why give me the opportunity to either meet with him or show this telegram to Dean?" She thought about it. "Because the letter scared him," she said. "He didn't know it existed. He thought whatever record he'd left was manageable or gone. Now it's in the hands of a lawyer, and he doesn't know what's about to happen." She paused. "He's not offering you a meeting. He's trying to assess the damage. He wants to know how much you have and what you're planning to do with it." "So it's not a negotiation," Caleb said. "It's reconnaissance," she said. He looked at her for a moment, with that expression, the one she'd been seeing more and more since the night on the floor with the chest. The one that was not quite the way you look at an employee, and not quite the way you look at a friend, and something she was being very deliberate about, not examining too closely. "I'm not meeting him alone," he said. "No," she agreed. "You're not." Tommy cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. Whitaker, I can ride to Deed." "You're not." Tommy cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. Whitaker, I can ride to Dean if you want, right now." Caleb looked at him. "Go," he said. Tommy went. Dean's response came back within 2 hours, carried by Tommy, at a pace that suggested the lawyer had been fairly emphatic about speed. The written note said 3 things: do not go to the meeting, do not respond to the telegram, and come to his office tomorrow morning at 8, because there had been a development. A development. Caleb read the note twice and said nothing. Lillian made supper. She put food on the table at 6. The ranch hands came in and ate, and the meal was what it always was. The steady, unremarkable rhythm of hungry men and good food, and the particular low-grade conversation of people who work hard and are comfortable with each other. Pete Alcott was back at the table now, moving carefully with his healing ribs, and he caught her eye once across the meal and gave her a small significant nod that she returned without commentary, after the men cleared out and the dishes were done. Caleb stayed at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee without being asked. She poured one for herself and sat down, not across from him, but at the angle, the same angle he'd chosen that first night. The geometry of proximity that wasn't isolation and wasn't intimacy, and had gradually become simply theirs. "Tell me about Eleanor," he said. She looked at him. Howe was looking at his coffee cup, his hands around it, his face in the low light, carrying something she recognized as the expression of a man who has decided to walk toward something he's been walking away from for a very long time. "You don't have to tell me anything," she said. "I know." He looked up. "I want to. I've been—" He stopped. Started again with the careful precision of a man choosing each word as if weight matters. "I've been talking to you in this kitchen for weeks, and you listen the way people listen when they're actually going to remember what you say. And He paused. "I haven't talked about her. Not to anyone. Not once since she died." The kitchen was quiet. "You don't have to do it for me," she said. "I'm not," he said. "I think I'm doing it for me." She held her cup. He looked at the table. "She was the kind of woman who made a room better just by being in it," he said. "Not because she was loud about it, because she paid attention. She noticed things." He stopped, looked up briefly. "Like you do." Lillian said nothing. "We were married 4 years before she got sick," he said. "The baby came early. The doctor said she'd been carrying the pregnancy wrong and didn't know it, and by the time we knew there was a problem, there wasn't enough time to—" His voice stayed even. The effort of keeping it even was visible, but only barely. "The baby was 3 days old. Eleanor was gone 2 days after that." The lamp burned between them. "I buried them together," he said. "On the east side of the property under the big cottonwood. She always liked that tree." A pause. "She used to say it sounded like rain even when the sky was clear." Lillian did not move. She simply stayed where she was, present and steady, and let him have the space of it. "After the funeral, I didn't leave the ranch for 6 months," he said. "And when I started going to town again, I found out what Marsh had done, what people were saying." He paused. "I think part of me was glad in a way, to have a reason not to." He stopped. "Not to what?" she said quietly. "Not to try," he said. "To be part of anything. It was easier to be the man they thought I was than to be the man who'd lost everything." The words sat in the air of the kitchen with all their considerable weight. She looked at him. She thought about a photograph face down on a shelf. She thought about a house built to last, kept clean and in good repair by a man who had stopped knowing quite what he was maintaining it for. "You didn't lose everything," she said. He looked at her. "You lost her," she said. "And the baby. And that is a loss that doesn't get smaller, and I'm not going to tell you it does." She kept her voice level and true. "But you kept the ranch. You kept your men. You kept helping people who needed it quietly, without wanting credit. You kept being who you were, even when you let the town think you were something else. She paused. You didn't lose yourself, Caleb. You just put yourself somewhere safe for a while. The first time she'd used his given name. Neither of them noted it aloud. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and something behind his eyes was moving, not breaking, not spilling, but moving. The way a river moves under ice when the temperature has started very slowly to change. Why did you really come west? He said. She met his gaze. Because I needed to start over, she said. And because I've never been afraid of hard work or hard people, and I thought the West would have both. She paused. I wasn't wrong. No, he said quietly. You weren't. Something passed between them in the kitchen that had no name yet and didn't need one. Something that existed in the space between what people say and what they mean, which is where the truest things often live. He stood. He rinsed his cup. He set it on the shelf. Tomorrow morning, he said. Dean's office, 8 o'clock. I'll have breakfast ready by 6:30. She said. He turned at the kitchen door. Miss Parker, he said. Yes. He looked at her, and in the lamplight she could see all of it, the grief and the guardedness, and underneath both of those, something that had been very carefully protected, but was not. It turned out gone. Thank you, he said. For a pause. For all of it. Go to bed, Caleb, she said. The ghost of something crossed his face, something so unfamiliar on him that it took her a moment to identify it. It was a smile. Small, unsteady, genuine. He went. She sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after not moving, thinking about cottonwood trees that sound like rain. Dean's office at 8 the next morning had a different quality to it than the day before, the air of a space where something has accelerated. He was already at his desk when they arrived, and he had company. A man Lillian hadn't seen sat in the corner chair. Youngish, sharp-eyed, with the particular contained alertness of someone who deals in information professionally. This is James Hobart, Dean said without preliminary. He's an investigator based in Helena. I've worked with him before. I contacted him last night. Caleb looked at Hobart. Why? Hobart answered before Dean could. Because Gerald Crane is not primarily a land speculator, he said. His voice was direct and without decoration. He's a debt consolidator. He identifies distressed properties, specifically properties owned by people with compromised reputations or legal vulnerabilities, acquires them at well below market value, often through manufactured legal pressure, and resells them to railway and mining interests at significant profit. He looked at Caleb steadily. He's done it 11 times in 4 states over the past 7 years. 3 of those cases involved prior manufactured reputational damage. In 2 of them, the same lawyer was involved in the initial setup. The room was very quiet. What lawyer? Lillian said. Hobart looked at her. A man named Aldrich Vane, he said. Denver-based. He's Crane's legal architect. He paused. And Harlan Marsh's current employer. Lillian felt the shape of click into place. The way a lock opens when you've finally found the right key. Not dramatically, just with a clean, definitive precision that meant the thing was true. Marsh works for Vane, she said. Vane works for Crane. The scheme against Caleb 4 years ago wasn't opportunistic. It was planned preparation. They identified the ranch as a target, had Marsh build a relationship with Caleb, manufactured the fraud accusation to compromise his reputation, and then waited. She looked at Caleb. They've been waiting for a drought year, for a moment when you'd be financially pressed enough that a generous offer might look reasonable. And when the offer didn't work, Caleb said. They moved to the deed challenge, she finished. Dean removed his spectacles. The telegram from Marsh, he said. What it actually means now that we have this context is that Crane's timeline has been disrupted, and Marsh is being sent to assess whether a deal can still be salvaged before the legal action becomes public and implicates all 3 of them. He's not offering a meeting, Hobart said. He's looking for an exit. Or he's stalling, Lillian said. Every man in the room looked at her. He wants to know what Caleb has and what he's done with it, she said. If Caleb agrees to meet and reveals that it's only the 1 letter and that Dean is the only person who's seen it, Crane and Vane have time to find a way to suppress it. Contest the authenticity. Find a counter-narrative. She looked at Dean. How solid is the letter legally, as evidence? Extremely, Dean said. The handwriting can be verified. The paper is consistent with the period. The third party named in the letter, a James Cutter formerly of Helena, if he's located, and he corroborates it's unassailable. Find Cutter, she said. Dean looked at Hobart. Hobart was already writing something in his notebook. Caleb was looking at Lillian with an expression she had stopped trying to classify and had simply started accepting as something she would think about later when there was time. There's something else, Hobart said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper, not with Crane's smooth, practiced gesture of condescension, but with the straightforward movement of a man handing over a fact. In my research last night, he said, I found a record from the Helena Land Registry. 3 years ago, 2 weeks after Eleanor Whitaker's death, a notation was made on this property's deed record. An inquiry. Not a challenge, just an inquiry. Logged and dismissed without follow-up. He laid the paper on the desk. The inquiry was filed under the name of a holding company, he said. Crane Land Acquisitions. The room was so quiet that Lillian could hear the clock on Dean's wall ticking. They were circling, Caleb said. Very low, very controlled. Before Eleanor was even buried, Lillian said. She watched his face. She watched a man who had believed for 3 years that his misfortune was the result of a partner's betrayal, and the town's ignorance understand for the first time that it was something colder and more deliberate than that. That someone had looked at his grief, at the rawness of his loss in those first terrible weeks, and seen an opportunity, and filed a paper. His jaw tightened. His hands on the arms of the chair were still, but the stillness was the kind that contains a great deal. Caleb, she said. He looked at her. This is good, she said quietly. This is what we needed. This connects everything Marsh Vane Crane, the timeline, all of it. This isn't just a defense anymore. She held his gaze. This is a case. He breathed. Once. Slow. Tell me what to do, he said to Dean, to Hobart, to the room, but his eyes were on her. Do not respond to Marsh's telegram, Dean said. Do not make any further contact with Crane. Carry on at the ranch exactly as normal, and let me and Hobart do what needs doing in Helena. He paused. And in the meantime, he looked at Lillian. Stay close to home. Crane is not a man who accepts disruption to his plans without responding to it. Lillian nodded. They stood. They shook hands with Dean and Hobart and walked out onto the main street of Harrow Creek, and the morning sun was full and merciless in the way of Montana summers pressing down on the town and everyone in it with total indifference. She was untying the mare when she became aware that Caleb had stopped moving. She looked up. Howe was standing with his horse's reins in his hand, looking at the street, at the people moving through it. The ordinary commerce of an ordinary morning in a town that had for 3 years believed the worst of him without requiring evidence. They all knew me, he said, before, and not a single one of them asked whether what they heard was true. She looked at him. Some of them knew it wasn't true, she said, and still said nothing, which is its own kind of answer. He was quiet. Does it still matter, she said, what they think? He turned and looked at her with the full weight of whatever had shifted in him overnight. Whatever door the kitchen conversation had opened, that was not going to close again. 6 weeks ago, he said. It didn't. I'd stopped letting it matter. A pause. Now. He stopped, looked away, and then back. I think I'd like my name back, he said. I think I'd like people to know who I actually am. She looked at him steadily. Then let's make sure they find out, she said. She mounted the mare. He mounted his gray, and they rode back toward the ranch side by side, and the town watched them go. And something in the watching had changed. Lillian could feel it, the way you feel a shift in temperature before you can name it. Not warmth yet, but the absence of cold. It was a start. They were half a mile from the ranch when she saw the rider. He came from the east, cutting across the open ground at a pace that was not casual fast enough to mean something angled directly toward them, in a way that left no question about whether the approach was intentional. Caleb saw him at the same moment she did. She felt the change in the gray beside her, the horse responding to the shift in its rider, that immediate, almost telepathic communication between a man and an animal that knows him. The rider pulled up 15 feet away. He was perhaps 40 trail-worn, with the look of a man who had come a significant distance recently and was carrying something that sat heavier than saddlebags. He looked at Caleb. "You Whitaker," he said. "I am," Caleb said. The man reached into his coat. Beside her she felt Caleb's stillness, not fear, but absolute attention, every sense focused to a point. The man produced not a weapon, but an envelope. "Name's Cutter," he said. "James Cutter. I was in Helena 3 years ago. I heard Harlan Marsh sent you a telegram." He held the envelope out. "I reckon you and I have some things to talk about." The summer air lay over the valley like something held in suspension. Lillian looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at James Cutter. "Ride with us," he said. James Cutter drank his coffee the way a man drinks when he hasn't slept in 2 days. Fast both hands around the cup without tasting it. He sat at the kitchen table across from Caleb and Lillian, and he had the look of someone who had made a decision that had cost him something and was still deciding whether it had been worth it. He set the cup down. "I left Helena 6 months after the deal collapsed," he said. "Went to Billings, tried to put it behind me." He looked at the table. "But Marsh contacted me last week, said you'd found something, said if I didn't get ahead of it, whatever happened next would land on me too." He paused. "He was trying to scare me into coming to him. Instead, I came to you." Caleb looked at him steadily. "Why?" Cutter met his eyes. "Because I knew what he did to you," he said. "I knew at the time, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I hadn't done anything wrong directly." He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "I've told myself that for 3 years, and it hasn't gotten any easier to believe." The kitchen was very still. "What do you know?" Lillian said. Cutter looked at her. She'd been introduced as the housekeeper, but something in the way she'd placed herself at that table, not deferential, not decorative, simply present and exact, had clearly communicated to him that the introduction was the least accurate thing about her. "Marsh didn't act alone," Cutter said. "I knew that. The deal was designed from the beginning to fail in a specific direction. The documents were structured so that when the county reviewed the collapse, the liability trail pointed at Caleb. Marsh did the structural work, but the legal architecture was Vane's, Aldrich Vane in Denver." "We know about Vane," Lillian said. Cutter blinked, then continued. "What you probably don't know is that Vane has a contact inside the county land office, a clerk named Sibley. Sibley is the one who filed the inquiry on this property 3 years ago, 2 weeks after Eleanor died." He looked at Caleb directly when he said the name with the careful honesty of a man who has decided that if he's going to do this, he's going to do it without flinching. "He's also the one who accepted Crane's deed challenge petition last week and moved it to active review when it should have been flagged for procedural defects." Caleb said nothing for a moment. Then, "There's a man inside the land office. Has been for at least 4 years, Cutter said. "Sibley takes a fee. He's not the main mechanism, he's just a door." He reached into the envelope he'd been carrying and removed several folded pages. "These are letters between Marsh and Vane from 3 years ago. I kept copies. I don't know why I kept them. Self-preservation instinct maybe, or..." He paused. "Or maybe I knew that someday I'd need to be able to do the right thing, and I was keeping the option open." He pushed the letters across the table. Lillian reached for them before Caleb did not, because she was faster, but because Caleb's hands had gone very still on the table, and she understood instinctively that he needed a moment before he looked at words that were going to confirm in black and white the full shape of what had been done to him. She read them. Caleb watched her read them. The letters detailed everything. Not with the directness of men who thought they could be caught, with the careful coded language of men who believed they were untouchable. But the meaning was clear enough if you knew what you were reading, and Lillian Parker knew exactly what she was reading. She looked up. "This is everything," she said. "Marsh Vane, the structural setup, Sibley." She set the letters down. "This connected to the letter from the chest. This is not just a defense. This is the entire operation laid out in their own handwriting. Caleb looked at the letters on the table. "Can I see them?" he said. Not a question. A quiet statement. She moved them toward him. He read them slowly. She watched his face and saw the same thing she'd seen in Dean's office the day before, that controlled, careful stillness, that in him meant the inside was doing things the outside had decided not to broadcast. But this time, there was something different underneath it. Something harder and cleaner than grief. He finished reading. He straightened the pages. He looked at Cutter. "You're willing to make a legal statement," he said. "Everything you've told me today. You'll say it to Dean, to a judge, if it comes to that." Cutter met his gaze without blinking. "That's why I'm here," he said. "It'll cost you," Caleb said. "Vane has reach. Marsh has contacts. When this comes out, they'll come after your reputation." "They already did," Cutter said flatly. "When the deal collapsed, Marsh made sure I looked incompetent at minimum and complicit at worst. I lost 2 business relationships because of it. Whatever they can do to me now, they've mostly already done." A pause. And a man can only swallow so much before he has to either choke on it or spit it out. Caleb nodded once, slow and certain. "Tommy," he said, raising his voice toward the back of the house. Tommy Walsh appeared in the doorway with the promptness of a young man who had been nearby and had not been trying very hard to pretend he hadn't been listening. "Ride to Dean," Caleb said. "Tell him we need him at the ranch today. Tell him we have Cutter and we have letters." Tommy looked at Cutter with wide, impressed eyes, then back at Caleb. "Yes, sir." He was gone before the sentence finished. Caleb looked at Lillian. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but the thing that passed between them in that moment was solid and real. The particular communication of 2 people who have been moving through something difficult, side by side, and have arrived together at a moment where the ground underfoot has changed from uncertain to firm. "I'll make more coffee," she said. Dean arrived within 2 hours, and the quality of his attention when he read Cutter's letters was different from anything Lillian had seen from the man yet. The careful professional skepticism fell away entirely, replaced by something that was almost, not quite, but almost excitement. The particular intensity of a lawyer who has just been handed the kind of evidence that comes along rarely and changes things when it does. He read everything twice. He asked Cutter 12 direct, specific questions, and Cutter answered all of them without hesitation or evasion. He took notes in a small, precise handwriting that covered 4 pages. Then he set his pen down and looked at the table and said to no one in particular, "Sibley." "You know him," Caleb said. "I know of him," Dean said. "I've always wondered how certain documents moved through the county office so quickly when other straightforward filings took weeks." He looked up. "If Sibley can be proven, and these letters go a significant way toward proving it, then everything Crane has filed in this county in the last 4 years is potentially compromised. Not just the challenge against your deed. All of it." Lillian felt the weight of that land. "How many properties?" she said. Dean looked at her. "I'll need to check the records," he said. "But if Crane has been operating here for 4 years with Sibley facilitating, I'd estimate 8 to 12 transactions." He paused. "Several of those families are still in the valley." The kitchen was quiet. Caleb's hands were flat on the table. He was looking at Dean with an expression that Lillian had come to recognize as the face he wore when he was thinking about something larger than himself. "If we take this to the county," he said, "it won't just clear my deed. It could unwind what Crane did to other people." "Potentially," Dean said carefully. "It would depend on the individual cases, but yes, potentially." Caleb looked at Lillian. She looked at him. She thought of the families who had come to his barn over the past weeks. The worn-out people with hungry horses and 2 thin children, the ones he'd loaded crates for and sent away without asking for thanks. She thought about what it meant that a man who had been carrying manufactured shame for 3 years had spent those same 3 years quietly keeping other people from sinking. "Do it right," Caleb said to Dean. "All of it, however long it takes." "It'll take time," Dean said. "And it'll get louder before it gets quieter. Crane will not go quietly. Vane will deploy resources. There will be challenges." "I've been patient for 3 years," Caleb said. I can manage a few more months. Dean gathered his papers. He stood, shook hands with Cutter, shook hands with Caleb, and looked at Lillian with the expression he'd been refining since their first meeting, respect that had moved past surprise and settled into something straightforward and unqualified. "Miss Parker," he said, "I find that I'm very glad you answered that employment advertisement." She smiled, small, genuine. "So am I," she said. Crane came back on a Thursday. He came without his easy smile this time, and without the performance of patience. He came with a man beside him, not Marsh, someone else, broader and harder-faced, and he tied up at the front gate rather than the house, which told Lillian something about how the calculation in his head had shifted. He was no longer performing accessibility. He was establishing position. She saw them from the kitchen window and went to find Caleb without running, because running transmitted alarm. And she had learned a long time ago that the way you move through a crisis communicates as much as anything you say. Caleb was in the barn with Pete, who had graduated to light duties and was clearly happier for it. She came to the barn doorway and said quietly, "Crane's at the front gate. He brought someone with him." Pete straightened. His hand went briefly instinctively to his side, then fell away when he remembered he wasn't wearing iron. Caleb looked at Pete, then at her. Then he walked out of the barn with the measured, unhurried stride of a man who has decided exactly who he is in this moment and doesn't need to perform it. Lillian walked beside him. She was aware that she hadn't been asked to come. She was equally aware that he hadn't told her to stay back, which in the language they'd developed meant something. They came around the side of the house to the front gate together. Crane stood with his hands at his sides and his companion slightly behind him. A man built like a problem. The easy pleasantness was entirely gone from Crane's face now. What was underneath it was colder and more honest, the face of a man who has decided that what he wanted is not going to be obtained through charm and has shifted to a different tool. "Whitaker," he said. "Crane," Caleb said. "I heard you went to see Arthur Dean," Crane said. His voice was flat and careful. "Twice. My legal affairs are my business," Caleb said. "They were," Crane said. "But you've made certain choices in the past week that have made them someone else's business, too." He looked at Lillian, a long, assessing look that was not respectful and not intended to be. "Miss Parker, you've been busy." She met his gaze without moving. "Mr. Crane," she said, "you've filed a petition with the county land office that you know to be procedurally fraudulent, supported by a county clerk. You pay to facilitate your acquisitions. You've conspired with a lawyer named Aldrich Vane and a man named Harlan Marsh to manufacture a reputational attack on Mr. Whitaker 4 years ago in preparation for this acquisition. And you began circling this property before his wife was in the ground." She kept her voice even and clear. "So I would think carefully before using the word busy as a criticism." The silence was comprehensive. Crane's face went through something, not anger, not immediately. Something more dangerous than anger. The cold reassessment of a man recalibrating threat levels. "You have no idea what you're involved in," he said. Quiet now. The quietness that is a warning delivered in a low register. "I know exactly what I'm involved in," she said. "And so does Arthur Dean. And so does a federal investigator named James Hobart in Helena. And so does a man named James Cutter, who arrived in this county yesterday and has given a sworn statement." Something moved in Crane's eyes. "Cutter," he said. "Cutter," she confirmed. The man behind Crane shifted his weight. Crane glanced at him, a fast, sharp look, and the man went still again. Caleb had not said a word. He was standing one step ahead of Lillian and slightly to her left in a position that was not accidental, and his hands were loose at his sides, and he was looking at Crane with the complete settled attention of a man who has nothing left to manage or conceal. "Get off my land," Caleb said. 3 words. No decoration. No anger in the voice, which somehow made it more final than anger would have. Crane looked at him. "You're making a mistake," Crane said. "I've made mistakes in my life," Caleb said. "Trusting the wrong man. Letting this valley think what it wanted about me without correcting it. Waiting too long to look in a box I should have opened years ago." He paused. "Letting you stay on my land one more minute would be a mistake I'm choosing not to make." A long-held moment. Then Crane turned and walked back to his horse. His companion followed. They mounted and rode. Not fast men like Crane never give the satisfaction of hurry, but they rode. And they did not look back. Lillian let out a slow, quiet breath. Beside her, Caleb said, "You named everything." "I know," she said. "I wanted him to understand how much we had." "He'll run," Caleb said. "Maybe," she said. "Or he'll escalate." She looked at Caleb. "Dean needs to know this happened today. The faster this moves through legal channels, the less room Crane has to do something we haven't anticipated." Caleb was looking at her with an expression she had been cataloging in her private mind for weeks now. The one that had started as assessment and had moved through a series of stages she was very carefully not naming. It was fully open now, all that careful architecture down, not dramatically, but completely the way a house looks when all the shutters are off at once. "Lillian," he said. The use of her given name, her first name, unmodified without the miss, landed with a weight that neither of them acknowledged directly. "Yes," she said. "I need to say something." He turned to face her fully. The summer afternoon was doing everything summer afternoons do: heat and light and the distant sounds of the ranch's ordinary life, and none of it was touching either of them right now. "I know that you came here to work. I know the arrangement was clear, and I know I was—" He stopped, started again. "I wasn't easy when you arrived. I wasn't easy for a long time." "You were honest," she said. "That's different from not easy." "I want to be honest now," he said, "about something that isn't about the ranch or Crane or the deed or any of it." His voice was even and low, and held steady, the way things hold steady when they've been tested enough times to know what they're made of. "You came here, and you saw this place for what it actually was. You saw me for what I actually was. Not what the town said, not what I let people think what I actually was. And you—" He stopped again, this time for longer. She waited. "You stayed anyway," he said. "You didn't just stay, you—" He looked at his hands, then back at her. "You stood next to me, at that gate just now, in Dean's office, in that room with the chest. Every time there was a place to stand beside me, you were there." The afternoon light lay over everything, and her heart was doing something she was not going to examine right now in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, in front of the house where 40 minutes ago Gerald Crane had stood and tried to take what wasn't his. "Caleb," she said. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly, and with a precision that told her he'd thought about how this could be misread and wanted to prevent it. "I'm not you work here, and I know what that means, and I wouldn't—" He stopped. "I'm trying to tell you that something has changed for me, in this house, because of you. And I thought you should know that because you deserve honesty from me more than anyone does, and I've been—" He looked at her directly. "I've been thinking about more than the ranch and the deed and Crane for a while now, and I didn't think it was right to not say so." Lillian Parker stood in the afternoon sun in the front yard of a house built to last, and she thought about all the practical, sensible things she could say. She thought about the arrangement and the wages and the clear lines of the position she had come here to fill. She thought about sitting in a kitchen with a lamp between them and a man telling her about a cottonwood tree that sounded like rain. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I've known for a while," she said. "And I've been thinking about more than housekeeping for a while, too." She held his gaze. "I wasn't going to say so first." "Why not?" he said. "Because you needed time," she said. "And because some things are worth waiting for until the person who needs to say them is ready." He looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then he said, "I think I'm ready." She looked at him. This man who had built a house and kept it, who had fed strangers quietly for 3 years, who had carried shame he didn't earn, and grief that would always be part of him, who had looked at her that first day on the porch, with those careful weight-bearing eyes, and said, "I don't expect conversation," and had spent the following weeks proving himself entirely wrong about his own needs. "I know," she said again, and this time it meant something different. He reached out and took her hand, simply without performance, the way a man takes the hand of someone he has decided to trust, and she let him. And they stood like that in the afternoon light for a moment that required nothing further from either of them. Then Pete Alcott's voice came from the direction of the barn, calling something to Tommy Walsh, and a horse responded, and the ordinary afternoon reassembled itself around them, and Lillian squeezed his hand once, and let go. "Dean," she said. "Tonight," he said. She went back inside. Dean came that evening and stayed 2 hours. He listened to the account of Crane's visit with the focused attention of a man adding information to a structure he was already building. And when they finished, he said that Crane's appearance was consistent with what he'd expected a man testing the damage before deciding whether to cut losses or double down. He had already sent Hobart's findings to a contact at the territorial governor's office. The Sibley situation was being handled through a channel that would not give Crane advance warning. Cutter's statement was notarized and copied and filed in 3 separate locations. "The deed challenge will be dismissed within the week," Dean said, "on procedural grounds at minimum and on grounds of bad faith filing, if the Sibley connection can be established quickly enough, which I believe it can." He looked at his notes. "The larger matter, Vane Marsh, the full scope of what they've been doing across multiple counties, that's a longer process. Months, possibly more. But the foundation is solid." "What about the other families?" Caleb said. "The ones Crane acquired from?" Dean paused. "That will depend on the individual circumstances of each sale," he said carefully. "Some of those transactions may be unwindable. Others may not be. But Hobart is compiling the full picture, and the territorial authorities will have what they need to investigate each case properly." He looked at Caleb. "I can't promise you everyone gets everything back, but I can promise you that what was done won't stay buried." Caleb nodded. Dean gathered his things and paused at the kitchen doorway. "There's going to be talk," he said. "When this becomes public." Caleb's named the accusations from 3 years ago, the reversal of all of it. People are going to have to reckon with what they believed and what they did with that belief. He looked at them both. "I want you to be prepared for the fact that some of that reckoning will be uncomfortable, and some of it will come too late, and some of it won't come at all." "I know," Caleb said. Dean looked at him steadily. "You're a better man than most of this town deserves," he said. "That's not sentiment. It's a legal observation." He put on his hat. "I'll be in touch by end of week." He left. The kitchen settled into its nighttime quiet, the lamp low, the sounds of the summer evening outside the particular domestic piece of a space that has held difficult things and held them well. Caleb reached across the table and refilled her coffee cup without being asked. She wrapped both hands around it. "He said it'll be uncomfortable," she said. "Let it be," Caleb said. "People who believe the worst of you for 3 years are going to have to look you in the eye," she said. "Some of them won't be able to manage it. They'll find ways to revise their own history, tell themselves they always had doubts that they weren't really part of it." "Probably," he said. "How do you feel about that?" she said. He thought about it honestly the way he'd begun to think about things. She asked him, not reaching for the easy answer, not deflecting. "3 years ago, that question would have kept me awake," he said. "What people thought of me. Whether I was right to say nothing, whether speaking up would have changed anything." He looked at the lamp. "Now I think I know what happened. You know what happened. Dean knows it. Cutter knows it. The people I care about know it." He looked at her. "The rest is noise." She looked at him. "That's a long way from the man the town thinks you are," she said. "The man the town thinks I am," he said, "is someone they made up because it was easier than asking questions." He paused. "I'm done being responsible for who they need me to be." She nodded slowly. Outside, the first of the evening stars had appeared the way they did in Montana, summers early and very clear, as if the sky had decided that darkness deserved to be made beautiful. "May Sutherland is going to want to feed you an entire meal when this is over," Lillian said. He looked at her, startled by the change in register, and then something happened on his face that had been happening more frequently recently, that unsteady, genuine, slightly unpracticed smile. "May Sutherland wants to feed everyone an entire meal at any available occasion," he said. "She'll make it 3 meals," Lillian said, "and she'll cry while she does it." "May always cries," he said, "at everything. Tommy Walsh's birthday, when a calf was born last March, when I fixed the Henderson's roof." "You fixed the Henderson's roof. Don't tell anyone." "Caleb," she said, "you are the worst-kept secret of the good deeds in this valley." He looked at her, and the smile was full. Now the real thing, warm and unguarded, and entirely unlike the man who had stood in the doorway of this house 7 weeks ago and told her he had no use for conversation. "Don't tell anyone," he said again. She held his gaze. "Your secret is safe with me," she said. "All of them." The lamp burned steady between them. The knock came just after 9. Not the front door, the back. The kitchen door, 2 sharp raps, the kind that means urgency without wanting to announce itself. Caleb was on his feet before she registered she was moving. He went to the door and opened it. Pete Alcott stood in the dark, his face drawn tight. "Ryder came from town," Pete said. "Just now. Said Crane left Harrow Creek this evening in a hurry. Took the south road." He paused. "Sibley left too. Same direction. Someone in the land office saw them together beforehand." Caleb turned and looked at Lillian. She was already at the table, pulling the lamp closer. "They're running," she said. "Or—" Pete hesitated. "The writer said Crane stopped at the telegraph office before he left. Sent 2 telegrams, long ones." "To Vane," Caleb said. "Or to someone with more reach than Vane," Lillian said quietly. The kitchen held the weight of that. She looked at Caleb. "Dean needs to know tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight. If Crane is moving, the timeline has accelerated. Whatever Hobart has in Helena needs to move before Crane can get a message through that gives them time to—" "Tommy," Caleb said over Pete's shoulder, and Tommy Walsh materialized from the dark of the yard like he'd been standing there already, which he had. "Ride to Dean, fast as the horse will carry you. Don't stop." "Yes, sir," Tommy said. He was gone. Pete looked at Caleb. "What do you need from me?" "Wake the others," Caleb said. Quietly. "I want someone on the perimeter through the night. Not because I'm expecting trouble." He paused. "Because I want to know if trouble comes looking." Pete nodded and went. And then it was just the 2 of them again, which had become the configuration in which everything important seemed to happen. Lillian looked at her copy of the letters which she had brought down from her room that afternoon and left on the kitchen shelf. The oilcloth package, slightly worn now from holding within it the documentary proof of everything. "He's afraid," she said. "Crane, the composure is gone. Men like him only run when they've done the math and the math is wrong." "That should make me feel better," Caleb said. "But it doesn't," she said. "A cornered thing is more dangerous than a confident one," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He stood at the window. She knew without seeing his face what his expression was, because she had learned to read this man the way she'd learned to read everything that mattered, with patience and close attention. He was the kind of person you had to be willing to look at steadily for a long time before he became fully legible, and she had been looking steadily at him for 7 weeks. What she saw now was a man who had picked up every piece of what had been done to him and decided clearly and without theater that he was going to see this through to the end. Not for himself only. For the families in the valley who hadn't had anyone to stand up for them. For Eleanor, maybe, who had deserved to be alive in a world that wasn't built on her husband's manufactured shame. For the simple, irreducible reason that a man who has always known what was right sometimes just needs to find his footing again before he can act on it. "Caleb," she said. He turned. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you're not going to be standing alone for it." He looked at her across the kitchen, the lamp between them. The summer night outside, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of 2 people who had found each other in a circumstance that had no good reason to work and had worked anyway. "I know," he said, and he meant it. Tommy Walsh came back from Dean's before midnight. He came in through the kitchen door with the particular breathlessness of a young man who has ridden hard and is still processing what he heard at the other end. And he stood in the kitchen where Caleb and Lillian were still at the table. Neither of them had suggested going to bed, and neither had acknowledged that they weren't going to. And he said between measured breaths, "Dean says Hobart already moved. Before Crane got to the telegraph office. The Territorial Marshal's office in Helena was contacted this afternoon." Caleb looked up. "How?" "Dean got a message to Hobart yesterday evening after Crane came to the gate," Tommy said. "Hobart went straight to the Marshal. Dean said. Tommy pulled a folded note from his jacket. He wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong. Lillian took the note. She read it aloud. Hobart has filed with Marshall Trent in Helena. Sibley was taken into custody this evening before Crane's telegram could reach him. Vane's office in Denver has been contacted by Federal Wire. Crane does not yet know the net is already closed. His running changes nothing. Stay on the property. Keep the documents secure. I will come in the morning. She set the note on the table. The kitchen absorbed the weight of it. Sibley's in custody, Caleb said. Before Crane could warn him, Lillian said. Tommy looked between them. Is it over? He said. The question of someone young enough to still believe that things end cleanly. Caleb looked at Lillian. The worst of it is over, she said. The rest is process. Tommy nodded, accepting this with the trust of someone who has learned in the past several weeks that when Lillian Parker characterizes a situation, the characterization is reliable. He excused himself and went to the bunkhouse, and his footsteps across the yard faded into the summer night, and the ranch settled back into its watchful quiet, with Pete and the other hands moving at the perimeter the way Caleb had asked. Caleb turned the note over in his hands. Crane is running to nothing, he said. He doesn't know that yet, she said. When he finds out, he'll have a decision to make, she said. Cooperate with the marshal and minimize his exposure or run farther and make it worse. She looked at him. Either way, it's not your problem to solve anymore. It's Hobart's and Dean's and the marshal's. He set the note down. It doesn't feel finished, he said. It never does, she said. Not immediately. Something carries for a while, even after the thing itself is done. She looked at him steadily. But the ranch is yours. The deed is yours. The truth is on record in 3 places. Cutter has spoken. Dean is moving. She paused. It's done, Caleb. You just haven't had time to feel that yet. He looked at her for a long moment. How do you know so much about how this feels? He said. She considered the question honestly. Because I've been waiting for things to be finished my whole life, she said. And I've learned that the feeling of it being done comes slower than the fact of it. She held his gaze. But it comes. He was quiet. Then he said, Go to bed, Lillian. She looked at him. The same thing you said to me 3 weeks ago, he said. And there it was again, that unsteady, genuine smile, the one that was still learning how to live on his face. You need sleep. So do you, she said. I'll sleep, he said. In a while. She stood. She picked up her lamp. She looked at him once more, this man at his kitchen table in his house that he'd built to last with the summer night outside, and the documents on the table, and everything that had been done to him in the process of being answered for at last. Good night, Caleb, she said. Good night, he said. And then quietly, before she reached the door, thank you. For today. For all of it. All of the weeks. She didn't turn around because some things are better received without the pressure of being watched. Get some sleep, she said. And she went upstairs. Dean came at 7 in the morning earlier than he'd said, and he came with Hobart, which told them everything about the pace at which things were moving now. They sat at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, and Hobart spoke first, because what he had to say was the kind of information that reorganizes a room. Crane was stopped at the Wyoming territorial line at 3 this morning, Hobart said. Marshall Trent's office had wired ahead. He's in federal custody pending transfer back to Helena. He set his hands flat on the table. He gave up Vane within the first hour of questioning, completely. Names, dates, transactions, the full structure of the operation across 4 states. Caleb said nothing. Lillian said nothing. Hobart continued. Vane's Denver office was served this morning. Marsh was located at a hotel in Billings last night. He hadn't moved yet, probably waiting to see which way the wind went. He's been taken in for questioning. He looked at Caleb directly. The man who spent 4 years making sure your name stayed dirty gave himself up to federal authorities at 6:45 this morning. He's already asking about what cooperation will get him. The kitchen was very quiet. What about the other families? Caleb said. The properties Crane acquired. Hobart and Dean exchanged a look. 7 of the 11 transactions are being reviewed, Dean said. 3 of those families are still in the valley. Based on what Cutter has told us, and what Crane has already disclosed, there are grounds to challenge the acquisitions on fraud. It will take time, months in some cases, but the foundation is there. He paused. 2 families have already been contacted. They're coming to my office tomorrow. Caleb stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically. He stood the way a man stands when something has settled in him that was unsettled for a very long time. Not with relief exactly, but with the particular quality of stillness that comes after you've been braced for something long enough that your whole body has forgotten what it feels like to not be bracing. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. Lillian watched him. "Caleb," Dean said gently. "It's done." A long pause. "I know," Caleb said. His voice was even, but she could hear in it the thing that was underneath the evenness, and she thought that was all right. That was what it was supposed to sound like. He turned back to the room. "What do I need to do?" he said, formally, going forward. "Review and sign the documents I'll have ready by end of week," Dean said. "Appear before the county land board when the deed is formally cleared, which I anticipate will happen within 10 days. And possibly eventually testify in the matter of the fraud prosecution if it goes to trial." He paused. "That last part may be months away, or it may not happen at all if everyone cooperates with federal authorities. But I want you prepared." "I'll be ready," Caleb said. Hobart stood. He picked up his hat. He looked at Lillian with the direct evaluating gaze he'd had from the first time they'd met and said, "The copies you made of that letter. 2 locations. The one in the chest and the one on your person." "Yes," she said. "The one on your person was with you when Crane came to the gate yesterday." "It was," she said. "And if he had taken it into his head to, then I would still have had the one in the chest," she said. "And Dean would have had the originals, and Cutter would have still been here." She met his gaze. "I'm not naive, Mr. Hobart. I knew what I was standing in front of. I made sure it didn't matter." Hobart looked at her for a moment. "Dean was right about you," he said. "What did Dean say?" she asked. Hobart smiled, brief, genuine. "That you were the most competent person involved in this entire situation." He put his hat on. He wasn't wrong. He shook hands with Caleb and went out, and Dean followed after a few more minutes of practical matters, and then the kitchen was quiet, and the morning was doing its ordinary things, and it was just the 2 of them again. Caleb looked at her. "The most competent person involved," he said. "Dean exaggerates," she said. "Dean," Caleb said, "has never exaggerated anything in his life. It's practically a character flaw." She looked at him. He looked back. And something between them that had been building for 7 weeks and had been named 2 nights ago in the front yard and had not yet been addressed in the daylight of an ordinary morning was present in the kitchen, now quiet and patient and not going anywhere. "I have bread to make," she said. "I know," he said. Neither of them moved. The news reached Harrow Creek, the way news always reaches small towns, not through official channels, but through the network of people who happened to be present when something happened and couldn't wait to tell someone about it. By mid-morning, the word was moving through the main street like water, finding its level. Crane was in federal custody. Sibley from the land office had been arrested, and the accusations against Caleb Whitaker from 3 years ago had been traced back to a deliberate fraud perpetrated by Harlan Marsh on behalf of a Denver scheme that had been operating across 4 states. Lillian heard about it from May Sutherland, who appeared at the ranch kitchen at 10 in the morning in a state of emotional agitation that she managed by the only means available to her, which was talking. Ruth Alderman cried. May reported settling into a chair with the relief of someone who has been carrying information at a fast walk for a considerable distance. Right there in the street outside the general store. Stood there and cried and said she should have known she always had doubts about Marsh, she should have said something. May shook her head. And Bill Connors, you know Bill from the barber shop, he went white as a sheet. He said things about Caleb 3 years ago. Said them publicly. He knows it. Lillian set a cup of coffee in front of May without comment. Where is he? May asked. Caleb. South pasture, Lillian said. He'll be back at midday. May wrapped her hands around the cup. She looked at Lillian with the frank, affectionate assessment of a woman who has been watching a situation develop and has her own clear views about where it's going. "You did this," May said. "Caleb did this," Lillian said. "He kept the documents. He went to Dean. He stood his ground." Lillian. May's voice was gentle and direct. "I've known Caleb Whitaker for 6 years. He had those documents in that chest for 3 years and never opened it. He went to Dean the same morning you found the letter, and were sitting on the floor of that room with him looking through it." She paused. "I'm not diminishing what he did. I'm saying that some people need someone beside them before they can move toward the things they know they need to do." Lillian looked at her coffee cup. "He would have gotten there," she said. "Maybe," May said. "But you got him there now, while the ranch was still his and the deed was still clean, and Crane hadn't finished what he was building." She reached across and put her hand briefly over Lillian's. "That matters. Don't talk yourself out of the part you played." Lillian looked at May's hand on hers. She thought about what it meant to have someone see you clearly and say so plainly, without agenda or performance. She thought that this was one of the things she had not known she was coming west to find, and had found anyway. "He's a good man, May," she said. "The best I know," May said firmly. "And he's been alone too long. And he looks at you the way he used to look at this valley before everything happened, like it's something worth protecting and tending and staying for." She picked up her cup. "I'm just saying what I see." Lillian said nothing for a moment. Then, "He told me about Eleanor." May was still. "He hasn't spoken her name to anyone," May said softly. "Not once. In 3 years." "I know," Lillian said. May set her cup down very carefully. "Then you already know everything you need to know," she said. He came in at midday, and the ranch hands came with him, and the kitchen was full and loud with the particular energy of people who know that something significant has happened and are processing it through the only language available to working men, which is to say, through eating and talking about something else entirely. But Pete Alcott looked at Caleb across the table with the quiet, deep recognition of a man who has worked beside someone for years and knows all the register shifts, and he said nothing. Just met his gaze and nodded once, and Caleb returned the nod, and that was the whole of it between them, which was exactly right. After the meal, when the others had gone back out, Caleb stayed. He sat at the table, and she was clearing dishes, and he said, "Ruth Alderman came to the south fence this morning." She looked at him. "I heard she was upset." "She rode out herself," he said. "Didn't send a message, didn't wait for me to come to town. Rode out." He paused. "She sat on her horse on the other side of the fence, and she said she was sorry. That she'd believed what she'd heard, and she'd never asked whether it was true, and she was sorry." He was looking at the table. "She said Eleanor deserved better than a valley that let her husband's name get dragged without fighting for it." Lillian set down the dishes. "What did you say?" she said. "I said Eleanor would have forgiven them already," he said. "She was better at that than I am." He paused. "I said I was working on it." Lillian looked at him. "That's honest," she said. "It's the best I have right now," he said. She sat down across from him. "Forgiveness doesn't have a deadline," she said. "It doesn't have to happen today or next week. It just has to be something you're moving toward rather than away from." He looked at her. "Is that something your mother taught you?" "It's something I figured out the hard way," she said. "After the position I lost before I came here, the people who made that decision, I spent a long time being angry at them. It didn't change anything they'd done. It just kept me from seeing what was in front of me." She held his gaze. "I stopped being angry somewhere between Ohio and Montana. By the time the stagecoach stopped in Harrow Creek, I was just ready to be somewhere new." He was quiet. "I'm glad you stopped here," he said. "So am I," she said. And she meant it without qualification, without reservation, in the complete and practical way she meant the things she said. He reached across the table, and his hand covered hers, the same way it had in the front yard, simply without performance, the gesture of a man who has decided and doesn't need to make a production of it. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that in the kitchen, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. and outside the ranch was doing all its ordinary things. And somewhere in Helena, federal marshals were processing the paperwork of a fraud case that had started with a letter in a locked chest. And in town, a valley was reconsidering what it thought it knew about a quiet man in the hills. And none of it required anything from either of them right now, except this two people sitting at a kitchen table holding on to each other in the plain, uncomplicated way of people who have found something real. The formal clearing of the deed came 8 days later. Dean brought it to the ranch himself, rather than requiring Caleb to come to the office, which Lillian suspected was the lawyer's particular way of marking the occasion. A man who exaggerated nothing, choosing to make a physical gesture that said something without saying it. He spread the document on the kitchen table. He showed Caleb where to sign. Caleb signed. Dean signed as witness. He blotted it, folded it, and handed it across. "It's yours," Dean said. "Clean and clear and on the record in the county office, the territorial office, and my files." He paused. "And before you ask, yes, Sibley's replacement has already been appointed by the county commissioner, and no, the new clerk does not have any connection to Crane or Vane." Caleb held the document. He looked at it for a moment, in the way of a man receiving back something that was always his, and is only now understanding the full measure of what it would have meant to lose it. Then he looked at Lillian. She was standing at the side of the table, and she had not been able to entirely prevent whatever was on her face from being on her face, and she didn't try. "Here," he said, and held the document out to her. She took it. She read the official language, the formal, dry, absolute words of a legal record, and she felt the weight of them, the way you feel the weight of true things. "Congratulations," she said, and her voice was steady. He took the document back from her and set it on the table, and he looked at Dean and said, "Thank you, for everything, from the beginning." Dean stood and extended his hand. Caleb shook it. "Don't thank me," Dean said. "Find that woman a reason to stay in this valley permanently. That'll be thanks enough." He left before either of them could respond to that which Lillian suspected was also deliberate. The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb looked at her. She looked at him. "Dean is subtle," she said. "Dean is not subtle at all," Caleb said. "No," she agreed. "He isn't." A pause. "Is there a reason?" he said. His voice was careful and quiet and entirely without pretense. "To stay permanently." She looked at him. This man who had said on the first day that he had no use for conversation and had spent every day since proving the opposite. This man who fed families who had nothing and asked for no credit and put a photograph face down on a shelf because he couldn't throw it away and couldn't look at it. This man who had taken her hand in a front yard on a Thursday afternoon and said, "I think I'm ready," with the careful honesty of someone who has learned that the only things worth saying are the true ones. "I think you know the answer to that," she said. "I want to hear it," he said. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "There is." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he put his hands on either side of her face, with the gentleness of a man who has handled enough fragile things to know that care is not weakness, it is the highest form of intention. And he looked at her for one long moment in which everything was already said, and then he kissed her the way a man kisses someone when he has been waiting long enough that the waiting itself has become part of the meaning. She put her hands against his chest and felt his heart, and it was steady and real and present, and she thought that this was what she had come west for, even though she hadn't known it. Even though she had thought she was coming for wages and honest work and a room with an east window. She had come for this. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. There were people in town who apologized, and people who found reasons to avoid the subject entirely, and people who had the grace to look uncomfortable, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Bill Connors from the barbershop came out to the ranch one Saturday morning, drove out himself hat in hand, literally, and stood in the yard and told Caleb that he'd said things he shouldn't have said and believed things he should have questioned, and he was sorry. He said it plainly and without dressing it up, and then he stood there waiting for whatever came back. Caleb looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate you saying it," he said. "Come inside. She just made coffee." Bill Connors looked like a man who has braced himself for a door and been handed an open window. He came inside. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee and talked about the drought and the price of cattle and the state of the South Road. And when he left, he shook Caleb's hand and tipped his hat to Lillian and walked back to his wagon with the slightly lighter bearing of a person who has put down something they'd been carrying without knowing it. Pete Alcott watched him go from the barn doorway and said to nobody in particular, "Huh." Tommy Walsh said, "What?" "Nothing," Pete said. "Just things work out sometimes, if you give them enough time and the right people." He went back to what he was doing. The Henderson family came in September. Not to the barn this time. To the front door. All of them, the man, his wife. 4 of the 6 children. And they stood on the porch, and the man held his hat and said that they had heard what had happened, what Caleb had done for the families in the valley. Not just the legal matter, but the years of quiet help, and they had come to say thank you properly. Caleb looked at them on his porch. "You didn't need to come out here," he said. "We know we didn't," the woman said. She had the direct, dignified manner of someone who has been through hard things and is still standing. "We wanted to." The youngest child, a girl of perhaps 4, with a serious face and a dress that had been mended several times, reached up and tugged the hem of Caleb's jacket. He looked down at her. She held out a wildflower, a single yellow one slightly crushed from being carried in a small fist. He crouched down to her level and took the flower with both hands, the way you receive something offered by a child, completely without minimizing it. "Thank you, miss," he said. She looked at him with the solemn evaluating gaze of a 4-year-old who takes things seriously. "You're welcome," she said. Lillian, standing in the kitchen doorway, felt something move through her chest that had no single name, but was made up of several things. Gratitude and tenderness, and the particular ache of watching someone you love receive the recognition they have always deserved. She went back into the kitchen. She started making enough coffee for 8 people. She made biscuits too because the Henderson children were thin, and because some things needed no justification beyond the fact that they were right to do. The fraud case went to trial in Helena the following spring. Caleb testified. He was gone for 4 days, and the ranch operated in his absence with the steady competence of people who had been well led long enough to know their work without supervision. When he came back on the gray horse in the late afternoon, and Lillian was in the kitchen, and she heard the horse, and she went to the back door. He dismounted. He walked the horse to the barn. He came out of the barn and walked to the house, and when he came through the kitchen door, he looked like a man who has done something hard and done it completely and is now finished with it. He sat down. She put coffee in front of him. "How was it?" she said. "Hard," he said. "And then it was over." She sat down across from him. "Marsh," she said. "He testified for the prosecution," Caleb said. "Full account. Everything." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "Vane will go to federal prison. Crane is looking at 8 years at minimum. Sibley has cooperated fully and will likely serve a shorter sentence." He paused. "Marsh, they'll take his cooperation into account. He'll serve time but less." "How do you feel about that?" she said. He thought about it honestly the way he always thought about things she asked him directly. 3 years ago, I would have wanted him to suffer for a long time, he said. Now, he paused. Now I mostly just want it to have counted for something. The families who got their land back. The ones who won't have this happen to them from these men again. He looked at her. "That's enough." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "It is." He reached across the table, and she took his hand, and they sat like that in the kitchen while the afternoon moved through the windows, and outside the ranch was doing all the things a working ranch does in the spring. New calves and fence repair, and the first green coming back into the pastures after the long winter, and the house was warm and alive in the way that a house is when it is properly inhabited. He said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," she said. He looked at her directly without preamble in the way she had come to love about him, because it meant that whatever came next was true. "I want you to stop being my housekeeper," he said. She was still. "I want you to be here because you're here," he said, "because this is your home, not because I'm paying you wages and you have a room with an east window." He paused. I know that means something has to change formally, and I know this isn't a simple thing to propose, and I'm not going to do it badly by pretending it is. I'm asking you whether you want to stay, not as help. As... He stopped, looked at her. Mine, he said simply and without apology. And I'd be yours, that's what I'm asking. Lillian Parker sat at the kitchen table of a house built to last, and she looked at the man who had built it, and she thought about an east-facing window, and a photograph, face down on a shelf, and a little girl with a wildflower, and a kitchen where the most important conversations of her life had happened over coffee in the lamplight. She thought about Ohio and doors that had opened and closed, and a stagecoach stopping in a valley she hadn't known the name of, and a man on a porch who had said, "I don't expect conversation," with the certainty of someone who had never expected to need it again. Yes, she said. His hand tightened on hers. Yes, she said again, because it was worth saying twice. They married in October, when the cottonwood trees had gone gold, and the air had the clean, cold clarity of a Montana autumn that knows what it is and doesn't apologize. Dean stood up with Caleb. May Sutherland cried throughout the entire ceremony, and for a significant portion of the reception, which surprised no one. Pete Alcott wore his good hat and shook Caleb's hand for a long time without saying anything, which said everything. Tommy Walsh grinned so broadly that Ruth Alderman, standing beside him, told him to put his face away before he hurt someone. Ruth Alderman had become someone Lillian trusted. Not immediately, not without the work of time and demonstrated sincerity. But a woman who rides out to a fence line to say she was wrong, and says it plainly, that is a woman worth knowing. They had found their way to each other over the course of the summer, the way certain women do through the slow accumulation of honest conversation, and shared practical work, and the mutual recognition of people who pay attention. After the ceremony, when the crowd had thinned, and the kitchen of the Whitaker Ranch was full of the aftermath of celebration plates and cups, and the warm residue of a day that had been in every sense enough, Caleb found Lillian on his back porch. He stood beside her. The evening was doing what Montana evenings do in October, coming in cold and clear with the stars already establishing themselves in the darkening sky. She was looking toward the east side of the property. He knew what she was looking at. He stood beside her and looked at it too, the cottonwood large and old and silver gold, in the last of the light, its leaves moving in the slight evening wind, with a sound that was exactly what Eleanor had said it was, like rain when the sky was clear. "Is this all right?" she said, quietly. Not uncertain she had learned to say difficult things without flinching, but careful because this particular thing deserved care. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is." She put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around it. "She would have liked you," he said. "Eleanor. She was the kind of person who could tell immediately what someone was actually made of. She didn't have patience for pretense." He paused. "She would have liked you before supper on the first day." Lillian absorbed this. She held it carefully, the way you hold something that has been entrusted to you. "Then I think we would have liked each other," she said. He looked down at her. "Yeah," he said. "You would have." The cottonwood moved in the wind. The stars came on one by one, with the unhurried certainty of things that are always there, whether you're looking or not. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her, and they stood on the porch of a house that had been built to last, and had lasted through everything that had been thrown at it through grief and fraud and manufactured shame, and 3 years of silence, and one summer that had changed the entire shape of what the house was for. It was still standing. So were they. Lillian Whitaker had come west with one suitcase and a determination to survive, and she had found something she never thought to look for, not because she had been lucky, and not because the world had finally decided to be kind, but because she had been willing to look at a man that everyone else had already decided they understood, and she had kept looking until she saw what was actually there. And what was actually there was this: a good man, a lasting house, a valley that was learning slowly and imperfectly to know the difference